Chapter 1094. Senior, there are prerequisites to surpass a few stars in battle. Ling Han thought for a moment. For example, I have grasped the 7-kill subduing soul technique. If I encounter someone 9 stars above me, it will be first. First doesn't cultivate a divine sense defense technique, so if I use the 7-kill subduing soul technique to suppress and lower first's battle prowess, I have at least a 50% chance of winning. In that case, I have battle prowess surpassing 9 stars. But if I encounter another person, B, he is only 8 stars above me in battle prowess, but he has cultivated a divine sense defense technique, so it is very likely that I will lose. Then my battle prowess is below 8 stars. But because B doesn't cultivate a divine sense attack technique, he naturally can't be first's match. This is strange. I can defeat first, first can defeat second, and second can defeat me. I really don't know how to calculate this battle prowess. Old Man Su laughed loudly, and said, "Not bad, not bad. You've already thought of this problem. Actually, just like how Shattering Void tier is measured by power, immortal level battle prowess is also built on power. After all, power is the foundation. How many stars genius refers to power, and not battle prowess. Of course, powerful power doesn't necessarily guarantee victory. This is also very normal. Thus, the number of stars genius is only a measure of one's battle prowess from the perspective of power, but it is the most important data. Without power, everything is useless." Ling Han nodded. That was indeed the case. Because the two of them had the same power, they cultivated different secret techniques, and the power was different, causing a clear gap between their power. This was not a matter of genius or hard work, but completely because they cultivated different secret techniques. Then, according to this, he was a 5-star genius. However, this was not his limit. He discovered that his power was still growing beyond his cultivation level, and could possibly reach the level of 6 stars. You reached the power of 20 stars in the Shattering Void tier, which means that you have cultivated to perfection in your previous cultivation levels. Otherwise, it would be impossible for you to reach the power of 20 stars, Old Man Su continued. However, if you cultivate to the peak of the consummate level of the Mountain River tier like this, your power can at most surpass 6 stars. 6 stars, wasn't that awesome enough? 5-star geniuses only existed in the legends. In fact, this might even be due to the fact that some secret arts were mixed in, and they might not necessarily be able to reach that level. Ha, young man, the vastness of the universe is far beyond your imagination. In the immortal realm, there is no lack of geniuses. Old Man Su shook his head. When I was young, this old man had traveled extensively and seen many geniuses. Only now do I realize that I have always been a frog in a well. Ling Han said solemnly, "Please teach me, senior." Old Man Su revealed a satisfied smile. This young man was neither arrogant nor rash. No wonder he could walk so fast and so far. He revealed a look of reminiscence and said after a long time, "The limit of martial art should be 10 stars. Puff Ling Han almost choked on his saliva. 5 stars only existed in legends, and now the limit was actually 10 stars. Furthermore, the 10 stars that Old Man Su mentioned were definitely 10 stars in terms of power, and not some secret technique that could increase one's battle prowess. Is it possible 10 stars? He was already very impressive, having cultivated each cultivation level to a perfect level. However, Old Man Su had also said that he could only reach 6 stars at most, which was close to half the distance to 10 stars. Only 10-star geniuses can surpass one major level in battle, Old Man Su said slowly. Even 9-star geniuses can only look up to this chasm. Even if you're at the peak stage of the consummate level of the Mountain River tier, you can only lower your head in front of someone at the early stage of the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier. Ling Han couldn't help but feel excited. He had never heard of a Mountain River tier cultivator being able to overpower a Sun Moon tier cultivator. However, if he could become a 10-star genius, he would be able to turn the impossible into the possible. Of course, This was under the premise that he had to be at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and his opponent was at the low extreme of the sun-moon tier. Otherwise, even becoming a 10-star genius would be pointless. But senior, you also said that even if I cultivated each cultivation level to a perfect level, I could only reach the power of 6 stars, Ling Han said in confusion. Wasn't this a problem that couldn't be solved? Old man Su chuckled, and said, young man, be patient. He stood up, and said, come with me for a walk. The two of them walked into the dense forest beside the lake, and old man Su said, do you know that the so-called consummate level of the mountain river tier isn't actually consummate level? Ling Han's heart instantly trembled. Not consummate level. The true pinnacle of the mountain river tier is 5 mountain rivers, not 4. Old man Su finally said something that was earth-shattering. Ling Han's mouth gaped open. He was truly astonished. For mountain river tiers, this was the publicly acknowledged ironclad rule of martial art. Everyone cultivated this way, and after forming 4 mountain rivers, they could begin to forge the sun and moon, advancing to the next cultivation level. Now, however, he was told that he could actually form a 5th mountain river. Could he form a 6th, or a 7th mountain river? Old man Su shook his head, and said, hee hee, 5 mountain rivers is the true pinnacle. It's impossible to form any more. This is equivalent to letting you cultivate to another cultivation level, and it's also the only possibility for you to become a 10-star genius. Ling Han was confused again, and asked, then from 6 stars to 10 stars, wouldn't there be a gap? Where did the 7, 8, and 9 stars go? Old man Su laughed loudly, and said, do you think that after forming the 5th mountain river, you will definitely be able to reach the pinnacle? Some people have only formed a mountain, and though some have formed a mountain river, they have not reached perfection. Thus, there are 7, 8, and 9-star geniuses. So that's how it is. Ling Han faltered, and said, going by that logic, sun-moon tier cultivators can also form 5 suns and moons, and heavenly body tier cultivators can form 5 heavenly bodies, then shouldn't there be 11 and 12-star geniuses? Old man Su chuckled, and said, however, there's one thing you're wrong about. He raised a finger, and said, only by cultivating to the true pinnacle of each cultivation level can you maintain the power of 10 stars. Otherwise, if you don't reach perfection in a cultivation level, your power will drop, and you'll become 9 stars, 8 stars, or 7 stars. Ling Han gave an oh. So it was so difficult to maintain the power of 10 stars. One had to cultivate to the pinnacle of each cultivation level. Senior, have you seen a 10-star genius before? He asked. A ferocious glint suddenly burst out of old man Su's eyes, and his face trembled slightly. After a long while, he finally calmed down, and said, this old man hasn't seen one with my own eyes, but I've heard that there are a few prodigies who are known as young king tiers. They are truly invincible in their own cultivation level. Ling Han was stunned. Not only did there exist, there were quite a few of them. How could this be possible? One had to know that if one wanted to reach the power of 20 stars of Shattering Void tier, they had to be rewarded by the heaven and earth. Otherwise, they could only reach 17 stars. The last 3 stars belonged to the forbidden level. Old man Su saw through his confusion, and said with a smile, do you think it's very difficult for the great elites of the immortal realm to send their clansmen into a small world and have them open the sky? Chapter 1096. In the galaxy, it was basically impossible for them to cultivate because there was no spiritual chi in the galaxy. They could only rely on true origin stones to absorb energy and alchemical pills, which was even more extravagant. However, Ling Han was an exception. There were too many people here, so no one would notice if a few disappeared. Thus, he could enter the Black Tower at any time and cultivate under the reincarnation tree. This was also what the Rain Emperor and the others were doing. They used true origin stones to absorb energy and swallowed alchemical pills to speed up their cultivation. Because of the existence of the reincarnation tree, they didn't have to worry about any problems with this kind of rapid growth. Ling Han mainly refined pills. Only with money could he buy godly metal and raise the level of his divine demon sword. Lacking money seemed to be an eternal problem. However, he clearly wasn't cultivating, yet his improvement was the fastest among them. It couldn't be helped. After all, there was a wisp of essence of a demon master in his body that constantly transmitted power of essence to him. Even when he was sleeping, his cultivation level was still rising. As long as he spent some time comprehending Tao under the reincarnation tree every day, he would be able to make his cultivation level match his temperament, and there wouldn't be any hiccups. In another month or so, he would reach the middle stage of the high extreme. Time passed quietly, and the chaotic chi at the entrance gradually disappeared, revealing the entrance to an abyss. It looked like a passageway from afar, but in reality, it was astonishingly large. It was like an ocean, and even starships could easily enter it. It was just that compared to this large tomb, it seemed small. The great elites did many tests, and tried to use unmanned starships to pass through. After a few attempts, they finally confirmed that they could enter. Instantly, one starship after another sailed toward the entrance. The city-sized starships that sailed into the entrance were like ants crawling into a cup. The difference was just this great. Everyone was filled with anticipation. To build a tomb in the starry sky and use a planet as a tomb, just what kind of great character was buried here? However, Ling Han sighed with emotion. So what if he was at the Genesis tier? Didn't his life still come to an end? In the end, his great achievements would still turn to dust. Was there really an eternal existence in this world? As he pondered this, the starship had already sailed into the entrance. It was dark inside, and only the light emitted by the starship illuminated a small space nearby. He immediately felt a soft body lean over. It was Shui Yenyu. Ling Han reached out and embraced the seductive beauty, saying, "Don't worry, I'm here." Shui Yenyu nodded. Actually, she rarely went out to train. In front of such a grand sight, she felt incredibly small and insignificant. The starship continued onward, and after traveling for half a day, a continent appeared in front of them. It was very strange for a continent to appear within the burial mound, but since this might be the tomb of some unparalleled expert, there was nothing strange about this. Almighty experts naturally had their own methods. The starships that had arrived earlier had already docked and were lined up neatly. Many people had disembarked and were currently exploring this continent. After arriving here, there was a faint light in the surroundings, enough for a deity to see clearly. There's actually air here. Ling Han took a deep breath. Although he did not need to breathe, he would still breathe out of habit. It was not necessary, but it made him feel much more comfortable. Be careful. Shui Yenyu pursed her lips. They just happened to pass by a starship that had a flag on it, on which the character, Zhao, was written. Great General Zhao's starship, and Zhao Luan had just disembarked. He was following behind a tall man, his expression incredibly respectful. Didn't they say that this great general was heavily injured? Why did he come out so quickly? Come, the temptation of this burial mound was too great. Even great General Zhao, who was recuperating, could not resist coming out. Ling Han nodded. Here, Zhao Luan was even more unbridled. If they met alone, Ling Han did not believe that great General Zhao would be polite to him. After all, he had slapped Zhao Luan's face time and time again, and this great general only had Zhao Luan as his only son. It would be strange if he was not angry. The starship stopped, and everyone disembarked, all of them impatiently. However, when everyone disembarked, the starship immediately returned. What a joke, who knew how many people were still waiting to come over to the joint peace planet? Naturally, they had to go and pull a few more starships, and earn as much as they could. Furthermore, they were not selling return tickets, but one-way tickets. If they wanted to return to the joint peace planet, they'd have to continue paying. Ling Han tried to determine the direction, but in this place, directions did not have much meaning. They were all relative. The spiritual chi here is thin, and completely unsuitable for cultivation, but there is life essence surging, so it can be said to be a holy land for cultivation. It's very strange, Ling Han said strangely. How do we go? Shui Yanyu asked. Let's go to a place with no people first, and let Big Brother and the others come out. Ling Han tried to determine the direction. Even though there were many people who had entered this place, because this continent was larger, it was not conspicuous that so many people were placed here. The two of them advanced, and Ling Han was just about to let Feng Peyun and the others out, yet he frowned and retreated. You guys have been following us for quite a while, Ling Han said calmly. Behind them, 4 men had appeared at some point. They looked to be in their 30s, and were at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. However, after advancing into the immortal level, one's appearance could no longer be used to determine one's age. Their vitality was flourishing, and they were almost in the prime of their life. They should be more than 200,000 years old. Brat, you can scram now. As for this beauty, we'll take good care of her. The 4 of them laughed loudly. Ling Han shook his head. There were really scum everywhere. They had just entered this large tomb, and they had already encountered 4 perverts. Scram. Fuck, I've been restrained on the ship for a few days, and now it's this beauty. I can't bear it no matter what. Third brother, you can't change this bad habit of yours. If it's really urgent, you can fuck this brat's bottom. Otherwise, you'll be ranked 3rd. When Big Brother and I have our fun, won't you explode? Scram, I'm not gay. The 4 men had no qualms, and their mouths were full of vulgarities. In their eyes, one of Ling Han was at the high extreme of the mountain river tier, and the other was only at the medium extreme. They could easily suppress either one of them. Boss, this brat seems to be unwilling to give in. Then let's kill him. This girl is really sexy, I can't hold back anymore. The 4 men all moved. They clearly had an advantage in cultivation level, yet they still wanted to gang up on Ling Han. It was clear that they were already used to this. Rules and whatnot were fake, and quickly killing their opponents was the way to go. Ling Han humphed, and the divine demon's sword was already drawn. Sword ray flashed, and it flew toward the 4 men. Yeah. The 4 men all exclaimed in surprise. They had not thought that Ling Han was actually so powerful. They felt that he was not someone to be trifled with the moment he moved. However, that was all. After all, he was only at the high extreme. Humph, your cultivation level is so much higher, yet you still want to win by relying on numbers. How shameless are you? An arrogant voice rang out, and they saw a young man stride over. He had a head of long green hair, and there was divine light intertwining around his body. There were also over 10 young men behind him, and they all looked at him respectfully. It was clear that this green-haired young man was the leader of this group. Chapter 1097. A large man turned around, and shouted at the green-haired young man, "Who do you think you are? How dare you meddle in my business? How dare you speak to young Master Wuk like this?" A young man wielding a spear leaped out from the group of youths. "I'll send you on your way." He raised his spear and attacked. The large man hurriedly raised his saber to parry. Ding, ding, ding. After a few exchanges, his expression changed drastically. Though they were both at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, his battle prowess was much weaker than his opponent's, and he was immediately at a disadvantage. Moreover, his opponent's spear was deadly, and his killing intent was boiling. He could clearly feel the threat of death. So powerful. He was shocked, and hurriedly roared. He began to fight with all his might. Flashes of divine light shot out from his body, and his body suddenly expanded a few times, turning into a 9-meter-tall giant. Pooh, his palm was pierced by a spear, but it was as if he had no blood in his body. This spear didn't even cause a drop of blood. And it was as if he didn't feel any pain. He raised his saber with his other hand, and slashed at the spear-wielding man. The spear-wielding man couldn't help but be shocked. He hurriedly flicked his spear, and flipped his opponent away, dispersing the might of this attack. Then, he revealed an expression of realization, and said, "You didn't enlarge your body, but merely filled it up. It looks big, but it's actually not an extension of your body. Thus, you were unaffected by my spear, and didn't even bleed. So what if you know?" The large man smirked coldly. "My body is so big now, and you still want to hit my vitals? Do you know where my vitals are?" "Ha, I don't need to know where your vitals are. Under my cold frost spear, your only fate is death." The spear-wielding man activated the spear in his hand. Instantly, multiple divine patterns bloomed, and endless cold air circulated, as if to turn the surroundings into an ice cave. The large man's teeth involuntarily chattered, and shock appeared in his eyes. Level 4 God Tool. This spear-wielding man was obviously under the command of the green-haired youth, but a servant could possess a level 4 God Tool. What kind of concept was this? This group of youths was incredible, and their background must be astonishing. "Ha, it's just a misunderstanding," another man said. "Since these two are your friends, please forgive us for being rash." The spear-wielding man turned his head to look at the green-haired youth. The green-haired youth merely smiled coldly and said, "You dare to offend a beauty, and you still want to live?" The green-haired youth immediately understood what the green-haired youth meant, and his spear swept towards the four men. Right now, he was incredibly powerful. His spear unleashed its might, transforming the surroundings into a world of ice and snow. This might had even surpassed the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and added with his own battle prowess, it was equivalent to two elites joining forces. Even though it was 1 against 4, he still had the upper hand. It looked like he would be able to kill all 4 of them in just a few moves. Ling Han could not help but nod. It was very difficult for a martial artist to have a battle prowess of 1 star, but it was different for a divine weapon. This was because it could be nurtured by a powerhouse and then bestowed to a descendant. It was completely capable of surpassing 4 or 5 stars. He was even more expectant. When the divine demon's sword caught up to his cultivation level, how astonishing would its might be? It was comparable to divine metal, so it definitely wasn't as simple as just possessing the ability to grow. Ah! Not long after, the 4 men had all been slaughtered. The spear-wielding man put away his weapon, and respectfully returned to stand behind the green-haired young man. This was astonishing. One had to realize that this spear-wielding man's battle prowess was extremely astonishing, and he was completely capable of standing on his own. Now, however, he was like a servant. The green-haired young man walked over, and flashed a charming smile at Shui Yenyu. He said, "Miss, I've startled you." Ling Han shook his head in his mind. It seemed that he had gained another rival in love. This wife of his was really a super femme fatale. Wherever she went, there would be people hitting on her, and all of them were of high status. Previously, it had been Zhao Luan, and now it was a green-haired man. Most likely, his background was no weaker than Zhao Luan's. "Please speak if you want to speak, but don't come so close." Ling Han stretched out a hand to block. "How dare you!" The spear-wielding man immediately jumped out, his spear drawn again, and pointed it directly at Ling Han. "Zhang Sun, don't be so agitated." The green-haired young man smiled faintly, and lightly pressed down on the spear-wielding man's spear. "I am Xia Wuk, and I come from the tyrannical Xia majestic empire of the Great Length Star." The spear-wielding man immediately put away his spear, and respectfully said, "Please forgive my rudeness, young master." Xia Wuk merely waved his hand, and said to Ling Han and Shui Yenyu, "How should I address the two of you?" "Ling Han, Shui Yenyu, my wife," Ling Han replied with a smile. Xia Wuk's expression involuntarily froze, and a dark expression appeared on his face. It wasn't that he hadn't seen beauties before, but this was the first time he had seen such a seductive beauty like Shui Yenyu. Adoration and possessiveness immediately welled up in his heart upon seeing her. However, she was already taken. He swept his gaze over Ling Han, and a mocking expression involuntarily appeared on his face. How could a nobody like him be worthy of such a beauty? He chuckled coldly. Anyone with eyes would be able to tell who was better between him and Ling Han. He was naturally filled with confidence regarding this. He was the 67th son of the current emperor of the tyrannical Summer Majestic Empire, as well as the youngest son. However, he was also the most outstanding descendant. He was only 507 years old, yet he had already reached the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. More importantly, he had been sent into a small world when he was over 40 years old, and he had successfully opened the sky there, cultivating every cultivation level to perfection. He was filled with ambition, and he wanted to become the most powerful prodigy in history. The situation here is unknown, and it could be extremely dangerous. Why don't we travel together? That way, we can look after each other, he suggested with a smile. Shui Yenyu shook her head, and said, we've only met by chance, so there's no need for that. She naturally knew what he was thinking, but her heart was already tied to Ling Han, so she naturally didn't want to cause any trouble. The two of them started to walk away, yet the spear-wielding man immediately stepped forward and blocked their path. What are you doing, Zhang Sun? Xia Wuk shouted coldly. The spear-wielding man hurriedly took a step back, and knelt down on one knee, saying, I was too rash. A confident smile appeared on Xia Wuk's face, and he said, Miss Shui, we'll meet again. Shui Yenyu didn't reply, and Ling Han merely extended a hand and shook it, not even turning his head around. Young master. The spear-wielding man scooted over. He was slightly confused. Young master clearly liked this woman, so why didn't he just make her stay? With young master's identity, status, and talent in martial art, what kind of woman wouldn't throw herself at him? You don't understand, Xia Wuk said with a smile, a meaningful expression on his face. What was the point of a woman that he could obtain too easily? Did he lack beautiful women? However, a woman as charming as Shui Yenyu was like a fine wine that needed to be savored slowly. Not only did he want to obtain her body, but he also wanted to obtain her heart. Thus, he naturally didn't need to be overly hasty. We'll meet again by chance. He waved his hand, and said, follow me. Chapter 1098. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu walked for a distance, and after confirming that there was no one nearby, he waved his hand, and the Rain Emperor and the others appeared from the Black Tower. However, not everyone, like Qin Yi, Zhu Wujiu, and the other followers, still stayed in the Black Tower to cultivate. Their present cultivation level was still too low, and staying here would not bring about the effect of training, so it was naturally better to spend their energy on cultivation. Only 5 people came out, Feng Peyun, the Rain Emperor, Mu Rongqing, Helian Tianyun, and Ding Ping. The Azura Demon Emperor was now in the form of a puppet wolf, and couldn't be counted as human. Moreover, he was originally a creature of the netherworld, and couldn't be considered human. This is the large tomb in the galaxy. The Rain Emperor and the others were all surprised. This place didn't seem to be different from the Joint Peace Planet, just that the spiritual chi was a bit weaker, but the life essence was astonishingly abundant. Ling Han nodded. This is the internal space of the large tomb, and it is indeed a bit ridiculously large. Hee, since we're here, let's split up. The Rain Emperor's eyes flashed, filled with fighting spirit. Feng Peyun and Mu Rongqing both nodded. Let's go together, so we can look after each other. Ling Han felt that this place was dangerous, and there were too many elites here. Although the Rain Emperor and the others had advanced into the immortal level and had the ability to surpass their cultivation level, there were still a lot of people who could suppress them. Fourth brother, we're all suitable for fighting, and cultivating blindly isn't our path. Feng Peyun said with a smile. Ling Han was startled, and slowly nodded. His 3 brothers were all top-notch geniuses, especially the Rain Emperor, who was an overlord of a generation. Such a person wouldn't rely on the protection of others. They were all proud people, and naturally had their own paths to walk. All right, then we'll meet at the exit in the future. Ling Han wasn't a pretentious person. Fourth brother, be careful. Feng Peyun and the others said, and then left. They ran so fast. Helian Tianyun scratched his head. Since they've all left, I'd be too embarrassed to stay. Brat Ling, we'll meet again in the future. He also found a different direction, and floated away. Master. Ding Ping was eager to try. Ling Han couldn't help but roll his eyes. You? Since you've broken through to the deity level first, I can allow you to go out and train. But for now, you should just stay here obediently. Yes. Ding Ping immediately became listless. The three of them also chose a direction to go. This was a plain, and there were no obvious landmarks around to guide them, so they just had to not turn back. This place was desolate. There was not a single living creature on the plains. Not only were there no rats and rabbits, but even a blade of grass did not grow here. It was as if this was a barren land. It was quite strange. Even though there was no spiritual energy here, ordinary creatures didn't need spiritual energy. Moreover, the life essence here rushed into the heavens, so the plants should be lush and the animals should be robust. How could this place become a land of death? They continued forward for almost a day. Ling Han was the first to let out a cry of surprise. He saw that there was a huge black mass of people in front of him, like an army formation. Just the row that he had arrived in numbered in the thousands, and if there were a few more rows, there would be tens of thousands of people. Master, what's wrong? Ding Ping asked hurriedly. Ling Han activated the Eye of Truth, and the astonishment on his face involuntarily became more intense because those were not real people, but stone statues. He said, walk faster. Oh. Ding Ping nodded hurriedly, but he was only in the shattering void tier, so how could he compete with Ling Han and Shui Yenyu in speed? Instantly, he was kicked in the butt by Ling Han impatiently. Xiao, he was sent flying towards that group of stone statues. Master! He screamed. Shui Yenyu couldn't help but roll her eyes at Ling Han. Other people would treat such a genius disciple like a treasure, but Ling Han was good, always thinking of ways to torment this disciple. However, Ding Ping's speed of improvement was also obvious to all. If she didn't hurry, it was very possible that she would be surpassed by him. Meanwhile, Ling Han laughed loudly. As he grabbed Shui Yenyu and hurried, he said, Disciple, Master is testing your reaction speed, and the result is very disappointing. Pang! Ding Ping fell head first, and directly plunged into the soil. He pulled his head out, and saw that he had already landed in front of a black mass of soldiers. This gave him a great fright, and he hurriedly put on a vigilant expression. Then, he discovered that these were only stone statues. At this time, Ling Han and Shui Yenyu had also arrived, and the Azura Demon Emperor followed behind them. Ling Han gazed around, and said in surprise, this stone statue formation has at least 1 million. Are these burial goods? Shui Yenyu asked curiously. Although 1 million stone statues was very astonishing, the great elites buried here were at least eternal river tier, so those 1 million stone statues were too ordinary. Probably. With 1 million people accompanying him, he wouldn't be lonely in the afterlife. Ling Han shook his head. Sigh, even if he is invincible in the immortal Tao, he will eventually turn to dust. Is there really no one who can be eternal and indestructible? Although the lifespan of Genesis tiers was ridiculously long, it was also limited, at most 4 billion years. This was indeed a terrifying number, but it was ultimately not eternal. There would always be a day when an era would end. There's another stone tablet here. They walked a distance to the left, and saw a stone tablet that was 9 meters tall erected in front of the stone statue formation. There were still words on it, but this time, they were no longer indistinct, but clear. Those who are confident of being invincible can barge through the formation, Ling Han read. Take a detour or barge through the formation? Shui Yenyu asked. They didn't know what this stone statue formation was, so it was better not to rashly take risks. Ling Han was just about to speak, but faltered, and said, "There's movement in front." They all leaped up, and saw that several thousand meters to their left, a group of people had barged into the stone statue formation, and these originally rigid stone statues actually moved, and began to attack that group of people. Now, both sides were fighting fiercely. "Puppet!" Ling Han and Shui Yanyu blurted out. They were really no stranger to these things now. However, there had only been 1,000 puppets on Earth's core island, and most of them were only at the low extreme of the mountain river tier. Now, however, the puppets here were all at the early stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and their battle prowess was quite astonishing. The group of people weren't powerful either, and were all beaten out in a short while. All of them were bruised, and their bodies were covered in wounds. "Let's take a detour," one person said. And this suggestion received the agreement of the others. They all walked around the stone statues. This stone statue formation was only about 1 kilometer wide, but it was extremely deep. Hence, it was possible that there were more than 1 million of them. When these people passed by Ling Han's group of 3, they couldn't help but glance at Shui Yenyu's face. Some of them seemed to want to cause trouble, but after glancing behind them, they hurriedly sped up, and hurriedly left. Ling Han turned around, and saw that Xia Wuk and his group were calmly walking over. The group of people from before was probably afraid of Xia Wuk and his group. "Hee, as expected, we're fated to meet again," Xia Wuk said with a smile. He was a little curious. There had clearly only been Ling Han and Shui Yanyu previously, so why was there another shattering void tier cultivator and a puppet wolf now? Chapter 1100. Xiao, the stone statue beside Ling Han, immediately recovered from its stillness, and punched fiercely at Ling Han. Ling Han also clenched his fist, and counterattacked. Peng, this stone statue immediately stumbled back. Its power was average, and it was at the early stage of the consummate level. However, Ling Han's power could surpass 5 stars now, and the power of this punch was at the late stage of the consummate level. Naturally, it was a crushing advantage. However, more stone statues recovered, and attacked Ling Han. Some leaped high into the air, and some charged at Ling Han. Their attacks were ruthless, and they showed no mercy. This was also the reason why Ling Han didn't let Shui Yanyu and Ding Ping come. If they did, they would really be killed with a single strike. Even if they were no match for the stone statues, and wanted to give up halfway, they would need to be extremely powerful. They couldn't retreat just because they wanted to. Within the stone statue formation, there was blood, severed limbs, and even corpses. Ling Han arrived. There were still many super prodigies here, and a few of them weren't weaker than Xia Wuk. They only used one hand to face the stone statues, appearing very calm. He believed that the number of prodigies that entered the large tomb this time was far less than this number. After all, not all prodigies were traveling alone, or with a group of weaklings, or with their seniors. It was also possible that they were traveling alone, and had Sun-Moon tier protectors hiding in the shadows. Once Sun-Moon tier or Heavenly Body tier elites appeared, they naturally wouldn't appear here. Perhaps there were Sun-Moon tier or even Heavenly Body tier puppets, but those were no match for Mountain River tier prodigies, and they could only watch from the sidelines. The prodigies were also competing. After this exploration of the large tomb, it would naturally be the major event of the Majestic Heaven sect accepting disciples. Perhaps many people here would become new disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect, and they would become competitors. Thus, they were already competing now. Ling Han naturally wasn't eye-catching. Although he was also advancing, it wasn't easy. After all, his cultivation level was too low. This kind of competition attracted the attention of many people, and they all watched from both sides. They wanted to know how many people could successfully pass the test, and if there were, who would be first. With this comparison, the fighting spirit of the prodigies was naturally even more aroused. Of course, it was not only the young prodigies who were participating. The older generation of Mountain River tier cultivators were not to be outdone, and also joined in the competition. Among them, there were indeed a few who were extremely powerful. Although they hadn't advanced to the sun-moon tier, they had really tempered themselves too well at this cultivation level, and used all kinds of methods to increase their battle prowess. Of course, there was no rule prohibiting the use of divine items here. Ling Han saw an elder take out a tortoise shell. There were several dozen divine patterns on the shell, and they were currently glowing, blocking countless attacks for him. This was the 8 immortals crossing the sea, each displaying their abilities. Those with strength relied on their strength, those with divine artifacts relied on their divine artifacts, and those without anything could only retreat to avoid dying in vain. At the front, Xia Wuk was still in the lead. However, the people behind him had already closed the gap between them, yet none of them dared to overtake him. The leader was under the greatest pressure. Hence, under the premise that the finish line was still far away, the geniuses chose to follow up and not rush to surpass it. The current first place holder is Xia Wuk. Who's Xia Wuk? He's the prince of the tyrannical Summer Empire, and also the #1 prodigy of the Great Length planet. It's said that the tyrannical Summer Emperor specially sent him into a small world, where he split open the sky and split open the earth. He received the blessing of heaven and earth, and in the future, not only will he definitely reach the heavenly body tier, but he might even become a legendary 5-star genius. 5-star genius? TSK, TSK, TSK. No wonder he can take the lead. He'll definitely win. Who can compete with him? Moreover, they actually specially left a small world for him to open up. This is truly astonishing. However, don't underestimate the others. The current second place holder is Xiao Sisi, the little princess of the Thousand Frost Majestic Empire on the South Plentiful Planet. She's also an exceptional genius, and has opened up a small world before. Fuck, having a good father is really too much of an advantage. The third person is Su Jing, a brilliant disciple of the Tai Lu sect. His strength is unfathomable. The fourth person, Duan, is also not simple. Among the young geniuses, these 4 people were the most dazzling and eye-catching, displaying strength that far surpassed that of their peers. This was also related to the fact that they had come by opening up the sky, so their starting point was higher than the others. Even if they could not form 5 mountains and rivers, merely their strength alone could surpass 6 stars. This was too astonishing. Even Ling Han could not possibly face these 4 people head-on. The 4 of them formed the first echelon, and there was no 5th person that could stand side by side with them. Furthermore, the gap between them was continuously widening. The second echelon consisted of the geniuses 1 level lower, as well as the mountain river tier of the older generation. For example, the person who had used the tortoise shell. Relying on the protection of this god tool, he was continuously advancing. And this god tool also caused others to be envious. It could withstand so many attacks from those at the consummate level of the mountain river tier without being damaged, who would not want to possess it. The third echelon consisted of geniuses that were slightly weaker. They possessed battle prowess of about 3 stars, but all of them were at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Otherwise, there was no way that they could have reached this step, and they would have long since been defeated. Then there was the 4th echelon. They all possessed battle prowess of about 2 stars, and were similarly at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Those behind them could not even be considered to be in the 5th echelon, because they had all just entered. Those who were weaker would very quickly be swept out. Ling Han was currently in the 4th echelon. He was not in a hurry, and walked slowly. He was using these puppets to train his battle prowess. Like the Rain Emperor, Feng Peyun, and the others, he was also the type that used battle to nurture his battle prowess. However, his cultivation level had risen too quickly recently. Though his mental state could keep up, his actual battle experience was a little lacking. Thus, these almost endless puppet formations were really a very good opportunity for him to train. If one looked closely, they would realize that Ling Han was not just charging through the formations. Moreover, every stone statue that he knocked down was on the verge of collapse. If it were not for the fact that there was a special power here that could allow damaged stone statues to quickly recover, it was guaranteed that every stone statue that Ling Han had knocked down would have been completely destroyed. After advancing for who knew how long, Ling Han suddenly discovered that there was an additional indescribable power in the fists of the stone statues. When these fists landed on his body, he actually felt a faint pain. One had to realize that Ling Han's physique was on par with level 4 godly metal. How could the power of the early stage of the consummate level possibly hurt him? Inconceivable. Ling Han couldn't help but notice that a divine pattern had appeared on the fist of the stone statue, and it was glowing at some unknown time. It was precisely this divine pattern that had unleashed its might, causing the attacks of the stone statues to become even more powerful. There was clearly no increase in power, yet the threat they posed had increased greatly. Peng, 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 peng. A flurry of attacks. Ah! In the last 3 echelons, there were people screaming in agony. After a few attacks, they were beaten into a bloody pulp. Many people could not hold on any longer, and hurriedly charged to the sides. However, some people succeeded, while others were knocked down by the flurry of fists. Then, they were unable to climb back up, and became a bloody pulp of corpses. Only now did the people in the surroundings realize that the power of the stone statue formation had increased. Chapter 1101. We've only walked 1/10 of the way, and these puppets have actually become more powerful. How can we pass? That's right. Perhaps they'll become even stronger if we walk a bit further. That's right. Perhaps they'll become even stronger if we walk a bit further. That's simply asking for too much. Everyone shook their heads, feeling that this was a test that could not be passed. The 4 echelons were still advancing, but it could be seen that the 4th echelon, which originally had the largest number of people, rapidly decreased after entering this possible second stage, becoming one of the echelons with the smallest number of people. There were only a few more people than the 1st echelon. Huh? Everyone was surprised. With the number of people decreasing, the remaining few people naturally became eye-catching, and Ling Han immediately stood out. This is unbelievable. There's actually someone in the high extreme of the mountain river tier. He hasn't formed his 3rd river yet, so he obviously hasn't reached the late stage of the high extreme. He can still make it here. This is too unreasonable. Is he a monster? He probably has some kind of treasure on him that can protect him and not be injured. Everyone nodded. Otherwise, so what if you were a prodigy? After all, the difference in cultivation level was too big. Moreover, the attacks of the puppets here were endless, as if they would never stop. How could a cultivator in the high extreme of the mountain river tier have so much origin power to expend? However, they didn't know that Ling Han also cultivated body arts, and his stamina would only need time to recover. This was different from origin power. Every time they advanced, some people would be eliminated. At first, there were thousands of people advancing majestically, but now this number had sharply decreased to several hundred. Those who were eliminated were basically those in the 4th echelon. Some people escaped, but a considerable number were also killed by the stone statues. Now, the 2nd and 3rd echelons had the largest number of people. The 2nd echelon had over 100 people, and the 2nd echelon had over 300 people. Meanwhile, the 1st and 4th echelons only had single-digit numbers. Battle, battle, battle. The bravery of the youths was stimulated, and they also had the pride that belonged to prodigies. Since there was such a test, there would definitely be people who could pass, so why couldn't they? This kind of unwillingness to admit defeat was sometimes a good thing, as it could help cultivators improve, but sometimes it was also a bad thing. Because they refused to retreat, they would forever stay here. About 2 hours later, the 1st echelon had already closed in on 2/10 of the distance. Due to the fact that the combat strength of the stone puppets had increased by a large margin after walking 1/10 of the way, everyone was prepared to face the sudden increase in strength of the stone puppet. Sure enough, the stone statue's battle prowess increased again when it reached 30%. A second divine sigil appeared on their fists. Ah! The old man who had been holding the turtle shell was the first to suffer. The turtle shell was repeatedly smashed by the stone golems, and the divine runes on it began to glow with an unstable light. Then, the turtle shell was smashed into 7 pieces. With this defensive artifact gone, how could the old man resist the stone statue's bombardment? In an instant, he was smashed into minced meat. He didn't even have a chance to escape. I'm done playing. In the face of such reality, many geniuses chose to let go of their pride. This was only the 3rd stage, and there were still 7 more stages ahead that would definitely be even more difficult. It was simply impossible to pass through. Was this really something that a mountain river tier cultivator could do? However, everyone immediately turned their eyes to Ling Han. At this moment, apart from him, the 4th echelon had been completely annihilated. They had either been killed or had retreated. However, a cultivator in the high extreme of the mountain river tier was still stubbornly persisting. Who on earth is this guy? That's right. In terms of treasures, he's not the only one with them. However, he's the only one in the high extreme who can persist until here. Freak. He's the #1 prodigy of our joint peace planet's chaotic star's majestic empire. He only arrived from a small world 2 years ago. There were people from the chaotic star's majestic empire present, and they revealed Ling Han's identity. What? Everyone exploded with shock, completely unable to believe their eyes. You're joking, right? Before this, when they discovered that Ling Han was only in the high extreme of the mountain river tier, they naturally felt that his cultivation level was too low. He was practically a monster to be able to rampage through the stone statue formation. However, when they heard that Ling Han had only arrived from a small world 2 years ago, their first reaction was that Ling Han's cultivation speed was too fast. In 2 years, he had advanced from the shattering void tier to the high extreme of the mountain river tier. Was this possible? However, there was more than one person from the chaotic star's majestic empire here, and they all voiced their affirmation. This forced the others to believe it even if they didn't want to. What meaning was there in saying this kind of lie? Even if it could scare people temporarily, it would be exposed in the future. But if that was really the case, then this guy was practically inhuman. His cultivation speed was frighteningly fast. The team of more than 400 people had already fallen to less than 200 people. This time, the 3rd echelon was greatly reduced, from more than 300 people to just over 30 people. Some people in the 2nd echelon had also given up, and some had died. However, there were still more than 100 people. Guess when this high extreme of the mountain river tier will stop? Someone asked curiously. This attracted the enthusiasm of the others, and they all began to make guesses. Unfortunately, there was no one to be the banker at this time. After all, no one had a good reputation that could allow others to place their bets without worry. They all came from over 100 great stars, so who knew each other? Master will definitely be able to walk to the end. Ding Ping said with clenched fists. That's true. Master is wise and mighty, and unparalleled in this world. To say nothing of walking to the end of this small path, even if there were 10 times more people, it would still be a piece of cake, the Azura Demon Emperor said. Shui Yenyu also believed in Ling Han, but when she heard the Azura Demon Emperor's words, she couldn't help but grimace. This guy was flattering for the sake of flattery. He had already reached the level of shamelessness. At this time, even the 1st echelon had slowed down. So what if it was Xiao Wuk and Xiao Sisi? Faced with this endless sea of puppets, they all looked strained. However, there was one person who was faster. Ling Han. He had already caught up to the 3rd echelon, and it was also because of this that the 4th echelon no longer existed. This was because he was the last person. Seeing this, everyone clutched their heads. This was far too ridiculous. Others were all slowing down, yet he could actually still increase his speed. It's not that his speed has decreased, but rather that others have slowed down. He hasn't slowed down, someone said. Everyone was stunned. The pressure was increasing step by step, yet Ling Han was actually still able to maintain his original speed. What kind of concept was this? They were going crazy, going crazy. How the fuck can you possibly be at the high extreme of the mountain river tier? Indeed, Ling Han didn't feel too much pressure. Up until now, the attacks of the puppets could only hurt him, but they weren't powerful enough to wound him. Moreover, they couldn't even wound him. In that case, Ling Han naturally hadn't used the recovery ability of the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. He still had many trump cards. 2 hours later, the first echelon had entered the fourth section. The battle prowess of the stone statues had increased again, and the number of divine patterns on their hands had reached 3. Their power clearly hadn't increased, yet the addition of a single divine pattern had increased their battle prowess by several tens of %. This was far too astonishing. The second echelon began to lose a large number of people. Chapter 1102. Not only was the second echelon losing members, but the third echelon was also losing members. Ling Han was once again the only one left. Everyone was amused by this. Was this guy a jinx? With him around, this team was going to be annihilated. No, he was too strong. Others couldn't hold on, but he could. The original team of more than 100 people was reduced to less than 50 people, and they were still advancing with difficulty. The 4 great prodigies of the first echelon drew their weapons at almost the same time. Obviously, they didn't dare to be careless, and faced these puppets with their bare hands. Otherwise, it was really possible that they would be swept out, and that would be too embarrassing. Admittedly, they had unlimited glory, but at the same time, they couldn't afford to lose. Otherwise, the halo on their heads would lose its luster. Very painful. Ling Han said in his mind. Previously, he had felt a little pain, and then it was a little pain. Now, it was really very painful. Being punched by a stone statue was like a child being spanked heavily by an adult. It was just that painful. Fortunately, pain and injury were 2 different things, and he was completely unafraid now. However, this was only the 4th stage. Most likely, when they reached the 5th stage, Ling Han would clearly feel the pressure. At that time, the attacks of the puppets would be a real threat to him, or at least they would be able to injure him. It was very inconceivable. It was clearly only the power of the early stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. This should be the power of regulations. However, in comparison, the power of regulations that these stone statues displayed had already surpassed the level of the mountain river tier, which was why they had such terrifying destructive power. The advancing speed of more than 50 people slowed again. Only Ling Han's speed didn't change. He was extremely stable, and only he, the third echelon, began to close in on the second echelon, and became one of them. At this point, there were only 2 echelons left. The 5th stage, as expected, there were as many as 4 divine patterns on the stone statues. Immediately, over a dozen people in the second echelon were instantly sent flying, blood splattering everywhere. Fortunately, those who could reach this stage were all prodigies among prodigies, and they all had their own life-saving methods. Thus, although their injuries were very serious, not a single person died. Ling Han also truly felt the pressure. When these puppets' fists smashed over, even his physique couldn't bear it, as if nothing had happened. Instead, he was beaten until he bled. The pain is excruciating. Ling Han didn't take the attacks head-on. Instead, he unleashed his movement technique and strengthened his attacks. He unleashed the annihilating dragon star arrow and shattered the stone statues in the distance. As for the stone statues nearby, he used the fast technique to cut them down. After all, these stone statues only increased their destructive power. Their defensive power did not change at all. Under his powerful offensive, his speed increased for the first time. He killed his way out of the second echelon and rushed towards the first echelon. The spear-wielding man and the others had already left the stone statue formation. They stared at Ling Han, their faces twitching as if they had seen a ghost. This guy is too much of a monster. In comparison, even Xia Wuk paled in comparison. There really wasn't a lack of geniuses in this world, and there was always a higher mountain. When Xia Wuk and the others sensed that a fifth person was approaching them, they all turned around to look. However, their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. After reaching such heights, they were truly condescending. This was not arrogance, but the confidence of invincibility. No matter how many people there were, they had an invincible heart and could suppress anyone who came. Therefore, they only treated the other three as opponents and never paid attention to the second echelon and below. Were they worthy? Now, however, someone had emerged from the second echelon and was gradually catching up to them. However, this was not the important point. The important point was that this person was actually only at the high extreme of the mountain river tier. If he really caught up to them, how could they endure it? As for Xia Wuk, his face had already turned green. He hadn't taken Ling Han seriously at all just then, yet Ling Han had caught up to him now. Wasn't this a slap to his face? He was a prodigy, and he had always been the one to slap others in the face. When had he ever been the one to be slapped in the face? He gritted his teeth and forcibly increased his speed. This was a very heavy burden on him. If this was already the 10th stage, then he could just muster up his strength and charge out in a single breath. However, this was only the 5th stage. If he unleashed his full strength here, then he would definitely run out of stamina. It was difficult to say whether he could walk out of this stone statue formation. However, he was even more unable to endure the fact that Ling Han had caught up to him. He knew that Shui Yanyu was definitely watching from the side. His pride and dignity would not allow him to do so. His battle prowess was truly powerful. Golden light radiated from his body, and even his arms had become a faint golden color. It was as if they had been forged from godly metal. He was completely unscathed as he took on the stone statue's attacks head-on. This kind of state naturally couldn't last for long. Thus, Xia Wuk unleashed his full speed and charged forward. He wanted to take advantage of this invincible state to increase the distance between him and Ling Han. Even if he exited this state later, he would still have enough time to recover. Stupid bird, Ling Han said in his mind. Xia Wuk was now treating him as a formidable opponent, yet he didn't take him seriously at all. If he didn't form his 5th mountain river and become a 10-star genius, how could he possibly view him as a rival? Although Ling Han hadn't taken this step yet, he firmly believed that he could definitely do it. He had a feeling that this stone statue formation was most likely prepared for 10-star geniuses. After reaching the consummate level of the mountain river tier, every increase in power of 1 star would allow one to pass a stage. 10 stars meant 10 stages. Thus, there shouldn't be anyone here that could pass, apart from him. He naturally wasn't a 10-star genius. In fact, he was still very far from the consummate level of the mountain river tier. However, who told him to have a powerful physique and freakish recovery ability? Thus, there was a possibility that he could pass. What he was more curious about was whether there would be any rewards for passing this stone statue formation. The 6th stage. The attacks of the stone statues became more and more violent. Power was only a part of battle prowess, and this saying was fully demonstrated here. However, this was also an extremely special situation. After all, cultivators definitely couldn't do this. You're clearly only at the mountain river tier, so how could you possibly comprehend the regulations of the sun-moon tier? This isn't a matter of time, but rather a matter of cultivation level. At this stage, there was no need to talk about how many teams there were. After all, there were only 5 people left. Ling Han, Xia Wuk, Xiao Sisi, Su Jing, and Duan. These were the 5 great geniuses. Who would be the first super genius to be eliminated? Who would last until the end? Who would be able to fight their way out of the stone statue formation? The people outside were all incredibly curious. They could clearly leave first, yet none of them were willing to do so. They were all waiting here, determined to witness the final moment. The sixth stage was extremely stressful. Even Ling Han was slightly wary of the attack power of the stone statues. As long as they landed a solid punch, even Ling Han would bleed. Even he was feeling this way, so the pressure on the other 4 people was naturally even greater. However, the other 4 people had an advantage in cultivation level. Whether it was in terms of power or battle prowess, they were all far superior to Ling Han. Thus, although their defenses were inferior to Ling Han's, they could make up for it with their powerful attacks. They wouldn't give the stone statues any chance to strike them. The 5 of them were all sweating profusely. Right now, they weren't just competing in terms of power, but also willpower. Chapter 1104. Everyone clutched their heads and exclaimed in shock. This was far too frightening. Xia Wuk and the others were all struggling to move, yet Ling Han was still accelerating at such a time. Humph! Xia Wuk clenched his fists, his killing intent boiling. This guy is quite a character. I can make friends with him, Su Jing said calmly. He could naturally sense Xia Wuk's killing intent toward Ling Han, but he didn't care. He had an invincible heart, and his background was also top-notch, so what need was there for him to fear? I've long heard of Brother Su's great name. It's my honor to meet you today, Xiao Sisi said with a beautiful smile. Although Su Jing's willpower was firm, his heart still fluttered in the face of her beauty. He hurriedly clasped his hands in greeting, and said, I've also long heard of Miss Sisi's great name. It's a pity that I've never had the chance to meet you. Barring any accidents, we'll meet again in the majestic heaven sect as fellow disciples, Duan said. His gaze swept over Ling Han, and he flicked his fingers lightly. I wonder how much this guy will grow at that time. Su Jing and Xiao Sisi both nodded, an expression of anticipation on their faces. In terms of battle prowess alone, they were naturally superior to Ling Han. However, that was because Ling Han's cultivation level was far inferior to theirs. Once their cultivation levels were equal, it would probably be difficult to determine who was superior in terms of battle prowess. Even if they were superior, they still couldn't find a way to deal with Ling Han's physique and recovery ability. Su Jing thought for a moment, but still shook his head, and said, there's really nothing we can do. Unless we can kill him with a single strike, he'll exhaust us to death. He felt that Ling Han's defense was unbreakable. He's just a lowly commoner from a small world. Why is there a need to praise him so highly? Xia Wuk said, his expression still filled with disdain. Xiao Sisi and the others only smiled faintly, and ignored him. Xia Wuk already hated Ling Han to the bone. With this preconceived notion, how could he make a fair evaluation? Thus, there was no need to pay him any heed. On the other hand, Ling Han's figure was as if he was flying. The destructive ability of these stone statues had already reached the level of 4 stars at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. So long as he was swept by them, Ling Han would definitely be injured, and his injuries would not be light. Therefore, he didn't dare to stop and tried his best to minimize the damage he would receive. But even so, he was still repeatedly punched and was riddled with scars. If it was someone else, they would have died after receiving so many punches. But Ling Han was almost unaffected. If you want to hit me, then hit me. I'll jump around. This caused everyone to be speechless. How could there be such a freakish guy? Were you really a human? Weren't you a puppet forged from godly metal? Stage 9. This was even more terrifying. The destructive power of the stone puppets had increased by another star. When they landed on Ling Han's body, a bloody hole would definitely appear with each punch. Even his godly bones were groaning. The expressions of Xia Wuk and the others all changed drastically. Their battle prowess was still superior to these puppets, but if they were to be struck by one of these puppets, they would definitely suffer. Other than a freak like Ling Han, most people's attack power was far greater than their defense. Hadn't they heard that attack was the best defense? Right now, with our strength, we can still suppress these puppets, but in the next stage. They didn't continue speaking. In the next stage, just a single puppet would possess the same destructive power as them. Then what would it be like if several hundred or even 1,000 of them attacked at the same time? They were confident that they would be able to win one-on-one. In fact, even 1 against 10 wouldn't be a problem. After all, these were only puppets. It was like a child wielding a peerless divine weapon. The threat was great, but as long as they dealt with it properly, they would still be able to win. However, when the number of puppets reached this level, there was no way they could deal with them. Although we are 6-star geniuses, in the last stage, we will definitely die with a grievance. Could it be that we really have to cultivate our physique and recovery power to a terrifying degree in order to pass this stage? Xiao Sisi pondered for a moment before saying, "Have you heard of 8-star or even 9-star geniuses in distant galaxies?" Su Jing nodded, and said, "There is indeed such a rumor, but how is that possible? I have already cultivated every cultivation level to perfection, yet I only possess the power of 6 stars. If I include some secret techniques, I can possess the battle prowess of 7 stars, but 8 stars is unimaginable. Don't forget, in our galaxy, 5-star geniuses are said to only belong to legends." Xiao Sisi revealed a profound smile, and said, "Since we have already surpassed the legend, this proves that the legend is completely possible. In that case, it wouldn't be strange for there to be 8-star or 9-star geniuses." This. Su Jing and Duan were both stunned. They were already supreme geniuses, standing at the apex. They were truly unable to imagine how they could advance further. Could it be that the legend is true? Duan's heart suddenly trembled. "Huh? You've also heard of that legend?" Su Jing couldn't help but exclaim. In the end, Xia Wuk was still unwilling to be a bystander, and said, "Humph, are you two talking about forming the 5th mountain river? What a joke. The 4 mountain river tiers are the iron law of the immortal realm, and the standard of martial art. How could it be possible to form the 5th mountain river?" Xiao Sisi agreed with his method, and said, "Indeed, we should be the most powerful prodigies in the world, and we've also split open the sky in a small world, cultivating every cultivation level to a perfect level. However, I've discovered that the 4 mountains and rivers have formed an extremely stable pattern, and it's really impossible to form a new mountain and river." Su Jing and Duan both nodded. After they had heard this rumor, they naturally had also attempted to form the 5th mountain river and truly become legendary geniuses. However, there was no hope of this at all. Most importantly, this was only a legend, and they had no confidence in it. Perhaps it was completely impossible to realize. This caused their determination to waver, and they wondered if they should fight to the death on this matter. If it was only to deceive them, then they would really suffer a great loss. However, I now believe that forming the 5th mountain river should not be fake. Xiao Sisi's eyes flashed with the light of wisdom, and she said, "If that is not the case, this stone statue formation is practically making things difficult for us." "That's right. If we form another mountain river, then even if we don't advance to the Sun-Moon tier, we will at least be on par with pseudo-Sun-Moon tier elites. There is definitely hope for us to pass through this formation." Su Jing nodded in agreement. "Great minds think alike. I will definitely attempt to form the 5th mountain river. If I do not succeed, I will definitely not advance to the Sun-Moon tier." Duan was brimming with confidence, and said, "Either I become a prodigy that stands above all others, or I would rather die." "All right." Xiao Sisi and Su Jing both nodded vigorously. On the path to the pinnacle of martial art, it was really rare to find a few like-minded people. They were not alone. Xia Wuk's expression was one of indifference, yet his heart was surging with emotions. He had to admit that forming the 5th mountain river was the best way to pass through this formation. Someone like Ling Han should be a crooked path. Who could possess such a freakish physique and recovery ability? He enviously watched as Ling Han quickly passed through the 9th stage, and charged into the final stage. Chapter 1105. The 10th stage. As expected, the destructive power of the stone puppets had reached a level similar to that of Xia Wuk and the others. This was almost undefeatable. It should be known that in this galaxy, there was no one who had formed the fifth mountain river. Thus, strength surpassing 6 stars was already the strongest, and how many prodigies of this kind would need to split open the sky and split the earth from a small world to come here? Even if Xia Wuk and the other 3 weren't the only ones, there were probably only a handful of them in total. But now, tens of thousands of such destructive stone statues were bombarding Ling Han. This caused Xia Wuk and the others to suck in a breath of cold air. If it were them, they would only be able to persist for 1 or 2 breaths under such an encirclement, and if they didn't use their trump cards, they might not even be able to escape alive. Ling Han was finally in trouble. Not only did the stone statue's punch cause blood to spurt from all over his body, but even his god's bones were cracked. They were not broken, but he definitely would not be able to withstand a few more punches. How many statues are there? Peng, 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 peng. Punches flew everywhere, and divine patterns bloomed. Pa, pa, pa. Ling Han's body continuously emitted the sound of bones breaking. Even in such a great battle, it was still clearly audible. This time, he definitely won't be able to hold on. Everyone was jealous, especially geniuses. They were confident that they were the best in the world, so they naturally did not want anyone to surpass them. Therefore, even Xiao Sisi and the other 2, who had no grudges with Ling Han, did not wish for Ling Han to be able to clear the stage. It would be a huge blow to their confidence if they could not. Now, with every step Ling Han took, his bones would be broken. How could he possibly pass this last stage? If he tried to be brave, he would only be beaten to a pulp. A cold smile appeared on Xia Wuk's face. Right now, he truly hoped that Ling Han's willpower would be stronger and allow him to continue onward. That way, he wouldn't have to do anything himself. After all, even he wasn't confident that he could kill Ling Han with his current defenses. Although this was not enough to vent his hatred, with his status, why should he lower himself to the level of such a lowly commoner? It was good that he was dead. Ling Han continued to bleed all the way. His body had already become severely deformed. The attacks that blasted at him were really too concentrated, and even the indestructible Heaven Scroll didn't have enough time to heal his wounds. The second and third wave of attacks had already arrived, causing his wounds to become even more severe. The connection of his godly bones was also disrupted. But it didn't matter. Even if he connected wrongly, he would be immediately interrupted and smashed. He wouldn't be given any time to catch his breath. It's halfway there. Ling Han silently calculated in his heart. He was already halfway through the 10th stage, and this made him feel much more confident. A drop of indestructible true fluid flowed through his body, and his injuries immediately healed completely. He let out a long roar and suddenly sped up. Damn, the people on both sides were dumbfounded. 10,000 curses ran through their minds. Monster, this guy was definitely a monster. You looked like you were about to die, but you suddenly became lively again. Are you deliberately messing with me? Ling Han activated the divine patterns of gravity with all his might. He gave up on all offensive techniques and sprinted at top speed. 6 out of 10, 7, 8, 9 passing was in sight. Everyone's hearts were hanging in suspense. Although Ling Han had exploded once, the attacks of the stone statues here didn't weaken. Very soon, he was beaten into a bloody mess again, and broken bones could be seen clearly. Was he still human? He was practically a pile of rotten flesh. But this pile of rotten flesh was still attacking. His godly bones shone with a dazzling light, and an aura of eternity flowed through them. The last 10 steps charge. Ling Han gritted his teeth. Peng, 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 peng. He was being attacked crazily, and he felt as if he was about to die. At this moment, he really wanted to hide in the Black Tower, but he had already come this far, so how could he be willing to give up? Fortunately, he had self-crippled in the past few heavenly tribulations, and completely shattered his godly bones. he was already somewhat used to this kind of pain. Otherwise, he really might have fainted from the pain. He burned another drop of indestructible true fluid, but if he used it continuously, even the effects of the indestructible true fluid would decrease sharply. It would only allow him to struggle at death's door. 8 steps, 5 steps, 3 steps. Ling Han gave a long roar, and charged out. When the area ahead suddenly darkened, and became a land of endless darkness. Ling Han lay on the ground, and discovered that the stone statues around him had completely disappeared. However, there was no one else on either side of him either. It was as if he had entered another space after his final leap. Peng's stone tablet appeared. It seemed to be made of white jade, and it was still exuding a gentle light. There were words on the stone tablet. Ling Han didn't. Instead, he first recovered from his injuries. After recovering some battle prowess, he raised his head again, and looked at the stone tablet. When I was young, I charged into the puppet sect alone, and annihilated millions of puppets, becoming the first person in history. I set up this formation so that the future generations would remember my greatness. Successor, although you have passed this formation, you should know that I have already reduced the battle prowess of the stone statue formation by a great deal. However, the fact that you were able to pass this formation can be considered not bad. I have some of my glory in the past, so I will give you some rewards. You should remember my greatness and magnanimity. There weren't many words, and Ling Han quickly finished. He couldn't help but grimace, and felt that the person who had set up this stone tablet was really narcissistic. You have to know that I am still in the high extreme now. When I reach consummate level, I don't even need to reach the peak stage. My godly bones will advance to the level of level 5 godly metal, and even if this stone statue formation is 10 times stronger, so what? Forget it, what's the point of bickering with someone who has already been dead for who knows how long? Ling Han shook his head, and looked at the stone tablet. There was something that the other person had left behind. I wonder what this narcissistic guy's name is. Ling Han discovered 4 items on the stone tablet, 3 talismans, and a black metal ball. Vajra talisman, lion talisman, swift cloud talisman, and what the hell is this ball? Thankfully, there were some words on the back of the stone tablet, explaining the use of these 4 items. Vajra talisman, when used on the body, can raise one's defense to the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. Gasp, this is not bad. It can be used from 1 to 10 times, depending on how long it is used each time. Ling Han picked up the Vajra talisman. There were strange symbols drawn on it, and it exuded an ancient and heavy aura. Really? Ling Han weighed the talisman in his hand, and said, if that's the case, then I have no fear against Sun-Moon tier elites. But if this old senior is playing a huge joke on me, then it's very possible that I'll be played to death. This was not impossible. One could tell from the words left on the stone tablet that this person was extremely narcissistic, and a little unconventional. Lion talisman, when used on the body, can raise one's power to the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier, and can also be used from 1 to 10 times. Swift cloud talisman, can raise one's speed to the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier, and can still be used from 1 to 10 times. Tisk, TSK, good stuff, really good stuff. Ling Han picked up the black metal ball, and murmured, this is actually a Sun-Moon tier puppet, it's really hard to imagine. He looked at the description on the stone tablet, and then after pressing a few times, he tossed it onto the ground. The metal ball immediately changed, continuously expanding, and its shape was also changing. Arms and legs stretched out from the ball, and it became a metal man. Chapter 1106. Whether it's real or fake, we'll know once the Azura Demon Emperor enters it. Ling Han put away the puppet. There were no true origin stones in it, so it could only make some simple changes. It didn't possess any true power. When he put away the puppet, his eyes instantly lit up. He appeared behind the stone statue formation, and there were people running over from both sides. It was as if none of them had noticed that he had disappeared for a period of time. Although this period of time wasn't long, it was still as long as a few breaths, and no one had noticed it. The methods of great elites were truly astonishing. Ling Han. Master. Shui Yanyu and Ding Ping both ran over, undisguised admiration on their faces. This was really too difficult. Even supreme prodigies like Xia Wuk could only give up, but Ling Han, who was only at the high extreme, had completed the trial. One only had to compare it to know how astonishing this achievement was. Congratulations, Brother Ling. Xiao Sisi and the others also walked over. Meanwhile, Xia Wuk humphed coldly. He hesitated slightly, and then swaggered off with the spear-wielding man and his subordinates. He wanted to kill Ling Han, but under the current circumstances, it seemed difficult to do so. Putting aside Ling Han's freakish defenses, Xiao Sisi and the others definitely wouldn't allow it. Thus, he chose to leave. Out of sight, out of mind. Some people came over to strike up a conversation with Ling Han, but with Xiao Sisi and the others present, their aura was far too powerful. They were so intimidated that they couldn't speak, and soon all left. Xiao Sisi and the others wanted to befriend Ling Han, so they put on a very humble attitude. However, this wasn't a good place to talk, so the four of them agreed to sit down and have a good chat after entering the majestic heaven sect. The crowd dispersed, and everyone was slightly disappointed because they had, personally, seen Ling Han come out of the stone statue formation, but didn't receive any reward. They had worked so hard, but didn't receive anything, so it was naturally disappointing. When the crowd dispersed, Ling Han tossed out the metal ball, and said, "Little Azura, try entering this puppet." He had already filled it with true origin stones. The Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly complied. Peng, this humanoid puppet immediately stamped its foot, exuding an incredibly terrifying aura. Master, this is a Sun-Moon tier puppet," he said in a trembling voice. He was about to faint. Previously, when he had lost two pseudo-Sun-Moon tier puppets, his heart had ached terribly. Now that he had obtained such great power, he had lost it again. Who would be able to get used to it? He had never thought that in just a year's time, his master would obtain a true Sun-Moon tier puppet. That was too much of a douche. Try it. What level have you reached? Ling Han asked. The Azura Demon Emperor moved a few times before saying, in reply to Master, there should be someone at the medium extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. Only medium extreme? Ling Han was slightly dissatisfied, but since he had obtained it for free, he couldn't ask for too much, right? He nodded, and said, "I'll give this puppet to you to use." "Thank you, Master. This little Azura will definitely work harder, be conscientious, meticulous, and give it my all," the Azura Demon Emperor said. However, although he had obtained a Sun-Moon tier puppet, he didn't dare to have any rebellious thoughts now. Ling Han had long since worn away his ferocity. In his eyes, since Ling Han could give him a Sun-Moon tier puppet without worry, it meant that he had a stronger trump card in his hands that could easily subdue him. This was not wrong. However, even if Ling Han didn't have something like a Vajrasil, he could still easily subdue the Azura Demon Emperor. The level of the Azura Demon Emperor's divine sense was too low, after all. Ling Han could knock him out with a single 7-kill subduing soul technique, and then easily draw him into the Black Tower. Ling Han first healed his body, no longer being attacked by the stone statues. With the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, his recovery speed was astonishing, and he soon became completely fine. He changed into a new set of clothes, smiled, and said, "Let's go." The three people and the puppet continued on their way. On the way, Ling Han told Shui Yanyu and Ding Ping about obtaining the 3 divine seals and the puppet. Who is the person buried here? It doesn't feel like a grave. How can he still be so leisurely after death? Shui Yanyu and Ding Ping both felt that it was inconceivable. You could just bury yourself for no reason, but why did you have to come up with so many tricks? Unwilling to be left out. Ling Han murmured. People couldn't escape death in the end. Perhaps this great elite didn't want to be forgotten by him for singing his praises. The life essence here was very astonishing. Not only could it increase cultivation level, but it could also heal the hidden injuries that cultivators suffered during cultivation and nourish the body. This was very helpful. Some people simply stopped exploring, thinking that their strength was too low, and they couldn't compete with others. Thus, they found a quiet place to stop, and began to cultivate and recuperate. This adjusted the body to the best condition, which was naturally beneficial for cultivation. After a few days, Ding Ping suddenly said, "Master, I'm going to break through." With Ling Han's alchemical pills, his cultivation level naturally increased rapidly. This was the immortal realm, and it was relatively easy to improve in the human domain. In terms of mental state, there was also the reincarnation tree. If it wasn't for the fact that Ding Ping wanted to reach the peak of 19 stars of strength, he could have broken through long ago. Ling Han stood guard for him. Even in the galaxy, the regulations of heavenly Tao were everywhere. Immediately, divine lightning rolled, and began to strike at Ding Ping. Ding Ping cultivated the shattering void tier to near perfection, but because he wasn't the master of a small world, he had no hope of reaching 20 stars of strength. However, 19 stars was still very awesome, which made his battle prowess incredibly terrifying. This heavenly tribulation was relatively easy for him. Half a day later, he also advanced into the immortal level. "Master, can I go out on my own?" He was full of longing. He hoped that he could be like his three uncles, traveling far and wide, and train on his own. Ling Han smiled slightly, and said, "What, your wings have hardened just like that?" Ding Ping hurriedly knelt in fear, and said, "This disciple dares not." Ling Han thought for a moment, took out the swift cloud talisman, and handed it to this disciple. He said, "Take it. If you encounter danger, you can also escape. In the future, we'll still meet at the entrance." "Master." Ding Ping was incredibly excited. This was something that his master had obtained after passing through the stone statue formation. It was incredibly precious. "Take it," Ling Han said with a smile. He had the cloud-piercing shuttle, so the swift cloud talisman wasn't as useful to him as he had imagined. Ding Ping respectfully kowtowed to Ling Han, and only then did he take the swift cloud talisman and leave with large strides. "Are you really at ease?" Shui Yanyu asked. Ling Han didn't say anything. After a while, he said, "The child has grown up, so he should be allowed to soar. Moreover, when I was at his cultivation level, didn't I already run to the imperial capital by myself? I even managed to pick up a beautiful girl." Shui Yanyu knew that he was teasing her, and couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. However, she was also slightly happy. What woman didn't like to hear their lover praise them for being beautiful? Ling Han laughed loudly, and pulled this seductive beauty into his arms, and kissed her. Shui Yanyu was greatly embarrassed. She pointed at the Azura Demon Emperor, and said, "There's someone else." The Azura Demon Emperor was shocked, and hurriedly lay down to bark like a dog. He still wanted to wag his tail, yet he discovered that he was no longer that wolf. He couldn't help but feel awkward, and with a bashful smile, he said, "Mistress, don't treat little Azura like a human." He was indeed shameless enough. Chapter 1108. Ling Han was very satisfied because he didn't use much power in this strike, and it was completely the power of the divine demon sword itself. It was clearly only a level 3 god tool, but because it was branded with his martial art intent, it actually possessed power above its tier, and could definitely rival a level 4 god tool. Even a god tool could surpass its tier in battle. Shua, the remaining fierce fish hurriedly waved their tails, turned around, and fled. Previously, Ling Han only scaled the fish and didn't kill, so these fierce fish had no scruples, but when they discovered that this person wasn't a great philanthropist to be trifled with, they naturally fled without a trace. This is the world's #1 divine sword. Shui Yanyu naturally also saw Gu Jinhui, and knew that he had specially come to deliver the sword to Ling Han. Ling Han nodded, and said, "I owe him a big favor." Shui Yanyu smiled, and said, definitely a favor, but I believe that only in your hands can this sword truly reach the peak. For a sword forger, this is what they think of the most. Otherwise, hiding it in their own hands would only make a pearl covered in dust. Wife, you're getting better and better at talking. Your little mouth is really sweet. Ling Han said with a smile, and made to pinch Shui Yenyu's cheek, causing her to roll her eyes at him in annoyance. I'm so looking forward to it. Come some stronger fierce fish, and let this sword rise to the height of level 4 godly metal. Shui Yenyu looked into the distance, and her expression instantly changed, and she said, You jinx, a large fish came in front of them. It was several thousand meters long, and though it wasn't the largest, the waves it raised surged over, directly throwing Ling Han and Shui Yenyu out. They didn't have the slightest ability to fight back at all. This fish's power has reached at least the Sun-Moon tier, Ling Han said. The large fish approached aggressively, opening its mouth and inhaling. Instantly, the nearby seawater surged into its mouth. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu were no exception, and were sucked in. What are you waiting for? Ling Han shouted. The Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly charged out. The power of the Sun-Moon tier surged, and he punched out, compressing the seawater and forming a shock wave that continuously expanded towards the large fish. Bam! The large fish was instantly knocked several thousand feet away. The power of this punch was so great that a hole had even appeared on its body, and blood was seeping out. Feeling the pain, the big fish angrily charged back. With a wave of its tail, raging waves rolled. The Azura Demon Emperor charged forward. Though he was pitifully small, his strength was no weaker than the Azura Demon Emperor's. His fist collided head-on with the Azura Demon Emperor's, and both of his fists were repelled. The man and the fish battled fiercely. Neither of them were cultivators in the truest sense of the word. One was a puppet that possessed battle prowess on the level of the Sun-Moon tier through true origin stones and formation patterns, while the other was blessed by nature with a massive body and terrifying power. Just like ants, how long do they need to cultivate before they can have the same strength as ordinary people? The abilities of the two of them were about the same, but the puppet had the advantage in that it didn't feel pain, and its body was also forged from high-grade godly metal, so it naturally had a great advantage. After a few dozen moves, many of the scales on the large fish had fallen off, and it began to bleed. It was afraid. With a flick of its tail, it ran away. Fuck your grandpa, little Azura, am really too powerful. The Azura Demon Emperor was very proud of himself. He had defeated an opponent at the Sun-Moon tier. This was something that he had never imagined in the past. Too awesome. When Ling Han came over, the Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly swept away the pride on his face. There was a fawning expression on his face, and he said, Little Azura is really too grateful to Master. Master, you are like a second parent to little Azura. You are the red sun in little Azura's life, shining wherever it shines. He began to flatter madly, completely unaware of the meaning of sappy. Enough, or else I'm going to vomit. Ling Han hurriedly waved his hand, causing Shui Yenyu to purse her lips into a smile. Only then did the Azura Demon Emperor shut his mouth awkwardly, feeling that he hadn't realized it yet. In any case, it was impossible for him to increase his abilities through cultivation, so he had been training his skills in flattery these few days. It was rare for him to come across such a great opportunity to display his skills, but he had never thought that he would be stopped the moment he opened his mouth. This made him feel slightly depressed. Why didn't Master allow him to display his skills to the fullest? After entering deep into the sea, this forest revealed its magnificent side. These giant seaweeds were no longer a single dark green color. Instead, they had become a riot of colors. There were purple, red, and orange, and the colors of the fish had also become rich and colorful. However, the threat of these fish had increased even more. That was because these big guys clearly didn't have the slightest bit of origin power fluctuation, yet they were born with divine patterns that granted them special abilities. There was a giant octopus that spat out ink when it came into contact with them, turning the surroundings pitch black. Not only would one not be able to see their own fingers in front of them, even their divine sense would be completely blocked, causing them to become completely blind, and could only passively take a beating. There was a giant fish with 5 colored spikes growing out of its head. Ling Han saw it pierce through the body of another giant fish with a single strike, strangling it to death. There were also some that possessed lethal poison. They didn't even need to hit their opponents at all. Wherever their bodies swam past, there would be a poisonous domain. Many giant fish directly flipped over, and were easily poisoned to death. This was a dangerous place. The big fish ate the small fish, and the small fish ate the cultivators. Of course, when the big fish were eating, they wouldn't mind eating a few cultivators along the way. There were corpses of giant fish everywhere, as well as the remains of cultivators. Usually, there was only a hand, a leg, or a head floating in the sea. The cloud-piercing shuttle wasn't very useful in an environment of water, so Ling Han didn't use this god tool. If he encountered big fish below the medium extreme of the Sun-Moon tier, he would let the Azura Demon Emperor deal with them. If he encountered stronger ones, he would hide in the Black Tower, and come out when the waves were calm. The fish here were still somewhat valuable. Some of the fish's bones were metallized, and their quality was comparable to godly metal of the same level. Thus, whenever he encountered them, Ling Han would put them into the Black Tower. In the future, he could use them to increase the power of the divine demon sword. In a certain corner of the deep sea, Empress Luan Xing was currently facing off against an old man. Nearby them, there was a 3-colored lotus in full bloom. Even in this kind of environment, one could still smell an incomparably serene fragrance from it. Without a doubt, this was a godly medicine. Otherwise, how could it have attracted Empress Luan Xing's attention? However, that old man was actually able to stand against her, which meant that his strength was definitely not ordinary. They both stood with their hands clasped behind their back, and there was not a single drop of seawater in the space of about 3 meters around them. This showed how powerful they were, being able to isolate even the seawater here. This is only a 3-colored wind and fire lotus, the old man said. It needs at least a few 100 million years to advance to the 7-colored level, so it's completely useless to ferry. Why don't you give it to me? I won't take it for free, and I'm willing to compensate you with 3 dragon fragrance pills. How about it? The old man said. The 3-colored wind and fire lotus was a rare treasure of heaven and earth. If a mountain river tier cultivator placed it in their Dantian world, they would be constantly nourished by the divine lotus. Not only would the accumulation of cultivation level increase explosively, but the divine lotus was also a rare treasure of heaven and earth. One could also use the divine lotus to communicate with the Tao of heaven and earth, and even their comprehension of cultivation level would receive a shocking increase. However, when cultivators advanced into the Sun-Moon tier, the essence of the divine lotus would also be extracted, and it would naturally wither. This one was still 3-colored. If it reached 5 colors, it could be used by Sun-Moon tier cultivators, and if it was 7-colored, even heavenly body tier cultivators would view it as a precious treasure. Chapter 1109. Empress Luan Xing was shrouded in an aura of primal chaos. Her eyes widened, and numerous large stars appeared behind her before quickly disappearing. Consummate heavenly body tier cultivators could only have 4 stars, but these stars were vanishing too frequently. There were actually countless stars blooming, and a majestic aura surged, displaying the might of a ruler. She humphed, and said, "I'll give you 5 dragon fragrance pills." The elder couldn't help but be startled. "Fine, I'll give you 3 dragon fragrance pills to give up on this 3-colored wind and fire lotus, but you're offering 5? Are you trying to throw it at me?" However, the dragon fragrance pill was not an ordinary pill. It could increase the comprehension of heavenly body tier cultivators, and could be said to be extremely precious. He was able to offer 3 dragon fragrance pills because he had a descendant that he was extremely fond of. At present, this descendant had just advanced into the mountain river tier, and with the help of this three-colored wind and fire lotus, this descendant would definitely be able to advance into the mountain river tier within 1,000 years, or even 100 years. Moreover, he would be able to cultivate his cultivation level to perfection. Otherwise, even the 5-colored wind and fire lotus was useless to him, so how could he offer such a price? Of course, if he had enough patience, he could also plant the divine lotus and let it absorb the essence of heaven and earth. In a few 100 million years, it might become 7-colored, and in tens of billions of years, it might even become 9-colored. However, with such a long time, who could afford to wait? The elder looked pensive, but immediately nodded decisively, and said, "Fine, 5 dragon fragrance pills, and this 3-colored wind and fire lotus belongs to Fairy." Empress Wan Xing casually tossed out a spatial ring, and swiped it at him. She was very domineering, and never hesitated when doing things. She walked towards the divine lotus. "Wait!" The elder stretched out a hand. Empress Wan Xing showed a hint of killing intent. Was he going back on his word? I'm not one to go back on my word. However, Fairy, don't you think you should let me check the authenticity of the dragon fragrance pill first? The elder waved his hand, smiling. Empress Wan Xing did not speak, but stopped. His reason was not unreasonable. Who could trust a stranger? The elder took out a pill bottle from his spatial ring, opened it, and poured out an alchemical pill. After studying it carefully, he smiled, and nodded, and said, "Fairy is indeed trustworthy." Empress Wan Xing walked to the side of the divine lotus, and carefully began to dig it up. This had to be done carefully, because it had to be completely transplanted into the martial artist's dantian. Otherwise, the effects would be greatly reduced. She took out a cloth bag. It was only the size of a palm, but it easily contained the 3-foot-tall divine lotus and tied it around her waist. Spatial spirit tools could not contain living things, this was something that everyone clearly understood. Then, what should they do to transplant the godly medicine? What if they were injured in the process of transporting it? Who could bear such a loss? Therefore, the virtual bag came into being. Forcefully restraining a space to contain living creatures could ensure the safety of the divine medicine. However, this space was extremely unstable. Normally, it could only contain plants. If it contained animals, it would have a great impact on this space, and it could easily collapse. Even so, the lifespan of each virtual me pouch would not be long, but the advantage was that it could be refined at the heavenly body tier, unlike spatial god tools, which needed the power of creation. The elder saw this, and in the instant that Empress Wan Xing accepted the divine lotus, he suddenly moved. 4 heavenly bodies appeared behind him, each of them exuding a boundless ancient aura. Boom! He directly used his ultimate move. This required some time to prepare, but Empress Wan Xing had been focused on digging out the godly medicine, giving him the opportunity to prepare. This strike was too terrifying. The surrounding seawater was instantly emptied, and all the giant fish within 1,000 miles directly exploded and died. The elder's strongest attack turned into a black spear, piercing towards Empress Wan Xing's waist. He still wanted this 3-colored wind and fire lotus. Empress Wan Xing flew into a rage. With a clear shout, she pressed her slender hand back, and thousands of divine patterns intertwined, turning into a net that pressed towards the elder. When an emperor tier was angry, heaven and earth would lose color. They were both at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, but Empress Wan Xing was clearly stronger. As the net intertwined, the black spear was trapped, and then torn to pieces. But at this moment, a crimson light passed through the net, shooting towards Empress Wan Xing's neck. Empress Wan Xing hurriedly dodged, but the crimson light followed her like a shadow, and its speed was astonishing, finally hitting her hand. Ha 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 ha! The elder laughed loudly, appearing extremely smug. Your Majesty, you've already been hit by my crimson fire needle. If I don't dispel it for you, your vitality will be slowly burned to ashes, and you'll die an extremely miserable death. Hand over the 3-colored wind and fire lotus, and I can save your life. After all, it's too much of a pity for a celestial being like you to die like this." A strange light flashed in the elder's eyes. This was an exquisite flower, and she was going to be plucked by him. Moreover, she was the ruler of a nation. If he could make her his slave, what kind of power would he possess? Behind Empress Yuan Xing, there was a large star floating, exuding an aura that made people tremble. Even the elder's heart was beating wildly, and he felt like he was going to collapse. Too powerful, too powerful. They were both at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, so why was the gap between them so great? Fortunately, he had enough time to use a powerful attack, and he had even used an ancient god tool. That crimson fire needle was shot out from the saint-destroying crossbow. What was saint? One could only be called a saint after reaching the Genesis tier, and this precious tool was known as the saint-destroying crossbow. Its might was evident. However, the saint-destroying crossbow that he had obtained was a damaged one. Putting aside saints, even eternal river tears couldn't kill it. However, it was still extremely powerful against heavenly body tier elites. Empress Yuan Xing didn't attack, and instead asked in a low voice, "You're a member of the Dark Night Hall?" The elder's heart jolted. How had she guessed where he had exposed his weakness? However, it was true that she had been hit by the crimson fire needle. When he thought of this, he relaxed. "That's right," he admitted openly. "How did you find out?" Empress Yuan Xing didn't answer, and continued, "Going by this logic, this was a trap in the first place. You discovered the three-colored wind and fire lotus here, and I was nearby. You guessed that I would come here sooner or later, and purposely pretended that you discovered this godly medicine at the same time as me, and took the opportunity to bury a killing move. Ha, your majesty is truly wise. You've guessed everything correctly." Now that things had reached this point, the elder didn't deny it, and said, "However, your majesty, I advise you to give up on any unnecessary delusions. After all, the longer you delay, the more blood and qi in your body will be incinerated." "Despicable brat," Empress Yuan Xing said in disdain. She raised a delicate hand, and a boundless might condensed, exuding a terrifying pressure. The elder paled in shock. How could she still have power after being hit by the crimson fire needle? Hadn't her origin power been incinerated long ago? Chapter 11:10. Empress Yuan Xing moved, and multiple regulations transformed into divine chains that flew out from her jade-like palms, sweeping towards the old man from the Dark Night Hall. This elder was definitely one of the elites of the Dark Night Hall. In this galaxy, how many people could cultivate to the consummate level of the heavenly body tier? Moreover, what kind of existence was the saint-destroying crossbow? It was definitely a precious treasure in the Dark Night Hall, yet he could take it out and use it. It was clear that he was one of the true higher-ups of the Dark Night Hall. The elder roared, and his skin and bones all lit up. He had been very old before, but now, his life essence soared into the sky. He was fighting with all his might. "Suppress!" Empress Yuan Xing shouted softly. Her large hand pressed down, and countless divine chains wrapped around it. This was the manifestation of the Great Tao, and it could best show the comprehension of the Great Tao of heaven and earth. The elder's blood essence surged. He still thought that Empress Yuan Xing had been hit by the crimson fire needle, and her blood was endlessly being consumed. She was at the end of her tether, and she definitely couldn't last for long. As long as he could get through this hurdle, then this world-shaking beauty would become his plaything. Just thinking about it made his heart, which had long been as calm as an ancient well, ripple. His state of mind, which had been cultivated for tens of millions of years, was like a young man, anxious to death. Perseverance would be victory, and it would be a visible victory. Capturing this arrogant empress should be the dream of countless powerhouses. If it was accomplished in his hands, then how satisfied would his vanity be? Peng, with a single strike, the elder was sent flying. Even his protective origin power shield dissipated, and the seawater invaded, drenching his hair and clothes. Wah! The elder spat out a mouthful of blood, his face filled with shock. How are you so powerful? They were both at the peak stage of the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, and he was also a 4-star genius. Theoretically, Empress Luan Xing could only be 1 star more powerful than him. However, from the result of this exchange, the difference in strength between them was more than 1 star. It was at least 3 stars. How was this possible? Rebel, die. Empress Luan Xing didn't answer at all. She had the heart of an empress, and her words were obeyed by the world. She wouldn't allow anyone to disobey her. If she wanted to kill, who could stop her? The elder took out a helmet and put it on. Instantly, the rules of the great Tao descended from the helmet and interweaved into divine runes that stuck to his body. A quick count revealed that there were more than 1,000 of them. He was a super elite in the first place, and he possessed over 3,000 divine patterns. Added with the 1,000 divine patterns he had just obtained, the aura he exuded instantly skyrocketed to a whole new level. His aura was actually no weaker than Empress Luan Xing's. Don't forget that this old man comes from the Dark Night Hall. My inheritance even surpasses the 3 great empires. My foundation is so deep that it far surpasses your Majesty's imagination, he said proudly. Relying on external objects? You're nothing but trash, Empress Luan Xing said coldly. Divine chains flew out, transforming into sabers, spears, swords, and crossbows that descended from the sky. This really was terrifying, as if the world was going to collapse. The heavens were going to punish that Dark Night Hall elder. The old man's expression changed. He had clearly taken out a high-grade god artifact, but he did not have the slightest confidence that he could emerge victorious. He only felt that the beauty before him was terrifyingly powerful, unimaginably powerful. Finally, he took out a black crossbow, which was inscribed with complicated divine patterns. However, this crossbow was damaged, and only half or even 1/3 of the divine patterns remained because the crossbow had been damaged. It was incomplete. However, this did not hinder the might of this crossbow. The old man no longer used his own power to conceal the existence of this crossbow. Instantly, a terrifying killing intent filled the sky, as if it could kill gods and slay saints. Saint-destroying crossbow, Your Majesty, I advise you to stop. I've brought a total of 3 crimson fire needles this time, and you've already been hit by 1. If you're hit by another, even I won't be able to save you. I can only watch as you die. Empress Luan Xing was completely unfazed. She pressed her palm down, and the entire world became dark. Countless divine chains descended, wanting to slaughter the old man. Humph! A ferocious glint appeared in the old man's eyes. Although he very much wanted to possess this beauty, his own life was more precious in comparison. At this moment, he no longer had any lustful thoughts. He struck out with his palm, and thousands of divine patterns intertwined, forming a wall in front of him. Meanwhile, he activated the saint-destroying crossbow, preparing to unleash a devastating strike. In terms of power, he was slightly weaker than Empress Luan Xing. However, the god tool hovering above his head was like a tiger that had grown wings. It made up for the gap of at least 1 star in power. Thus, even if he was no match for her, he wouldn't be defeated immediately. He was currently buying time to activate the saint-destroying crossbow. Combined with the crimson fire needles, an elite at the heavenly body tier definitely wouldn't be able to survive. Even if 1 crimson fire needle couldn't deal with the old man, he would use 2. Finally, the saint-destroying crossbow was activated. The quality of this god tool was far too high. Even if the old man was astonishingly powerful, activating the god tool twice in a short period of time was still extremely taxing on him. Sweat rolled down his forehead, and even his aura was becoming chaotic. However, once the saint-destroying crossbow was activated, a terrifying aura instantly swept through the world. This was a saint tool, even if it was damaged now, and its might had long since diminished. A serious expression appeared on Empress Luan Xing's face. Facing such a saint tool, even she didn't dare to be careless. She gave a soft shout, and 9 great mountains appeared behind her. They all surged toward the old man. Go! The old man gritted his teeth. He no longer held any hope of getting lucky, and he fired the crimson fire needle from the saint-destroying crossbow. A crimson streak of light shot out, directly passing through Empress Wanxing's blockade of regulations and shooting toward her. A cold smile appeared on the old man's face. As long as he fired the saint-destroying crossbow, it meant that his opponent would definitely be hit. Unless one's power was above the saint-destroying crossbow, moreover, the crimson fire needle could rapidly burn a cultivator's chi and blood. Even heavenly body tier elites wouldn't be able to withstand it for long. Empress Wanxing had already been hit by one of the needles. Even if she had a secret technique, she might be able to temporarily withstand it. However, if both needles were used at the same time, she definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it. Previously, Empress Wanxing had dodged, but this time, she didn't even try to dodge. The crimson streak of light directly pierced into her chest. She was done for. The old man was both elated and regretful. After being hit by 2 crimson fire needles, she was naturally doomed. Even he wouldn't be able to save her. However, such a great beauty had died just like that, and he didn't even get to taste her. This was too much of a pity. However, he immediately revealed a look of suspicion and even fear. This was because Empress Wanxing was still standing there, completely unscathed. Her chi and blood were soaring, and her domineering aura hadn't diminished in the slightest. How could she look like someone who had been struck by 2 crimson fire needles? Die! After Empress Wanxing blocked this attack, she unleashed a powerful attack. The surrounding space was shattered by her palm. The old man gritted his teeth and lost all will to fight. He quickly turned around and ran. Empress Wanxing chased after the crimson fire needle for a few steps. However, her footsteps suddenly faltered, and a sliver of confusion appeared in her movements. The first attack was successful, and the 9 Deaths Heaven art was actually unable to completely suppress the crimson fire needle. Fortunately, I was prepared for the second attack, and used that strange rock to block the attack. The assassination methods of the Dark Night Hall were naturally terrifying, and the saint-destroying crossbow was a precious treasure that could suppress heavenly body tier elites. Even if you flee to the ends of the earth, I will still slaughter you. She gave chase. Chapter 11-12. Xiao. An elder flew over, his powerful aura suffocating everyone. It was as if the heavens were collapsing. This was a supreme elite of the heavenly body tier. Ling Han's expression immediately froze, and he hurriedly retreated. He couldn't oppose such an elite. Even if he had to expose his spatial god tool, he had to hide in the Black Tower. Otherwise, he would be courting death. He flashed to Shui Yenyu's side, picked her up, and was about to enter the Black Tower. However, he suddenly faltered. This was because he sensed another powerful aura. In fact, this aura was even more powerful than this elder's. Moreover, it was slightly familiar. It was Empress Wanxing. As this thought flashed through his mind, he immediately dismissed the idea of entering the Black Tower. Instead, he stood where he was, silently observing the situation. Elder Tai Feng. The middle-aged man was pleasantly surprised, but he didn't notice that Elder Tai Feng was in an extremely sorry state. His clothes were already in tatters, and they were also covered in blood. A divine chain of regulations suddenly shot over like a sharp spear, catching up to Elder Tai Feng. Pooh! It pierced through his shoulder and wrapped around him. Elder Tai Feng was in an extremely sorry state. He had already been chased by Empress Wanxing for a day and a night, and he had used all kinds of methods, but they were all ineffective. Before this Empress, all of his methods were useless. He didn't dare to fight back. Instead, he used his hand like a sword and slashed at his shoulder. Blood splattered, and half of his shoulder was forcibly sliced off. However, the divine chain that bound him also lost its effect because of this. However, just as he was about to run again, a large white hand descended from the sky. This hand was as clear as jade, and its fingers were long and slender. It was filled with beauty, but in Elder Tai Feng's eyes, it was like a death sentence. An expression of despair appeared on his face. He had already used all of his methods, and he couldn't block it anymore. Boom! The large hand descended, and he was forcibly suppressed to the bottom of the sea. When the large hand disappeared, at least 1/3 of his bones had been broken. He was coughing blood continuously, and his aura had fallen to rock bottom. Elder Tai Feng. The middle-aged man almost wet his pants in fear. In his eyes, Elder Tai Feng was the #1 assassin in the world. There was no one he couldn't kill. Even if he was stronger than Elder Tai Feng, so what? Assassins wouldn't fight head-on. Instead, they would look for the most suitable opportunity to deal a fatal blow, and then leave, regardless of success or failure. Generally speaking, it was very difficult for heavenly body tier elites to die. If they wanted to escape, who could stop them? However, as many as 10 heavenly body tier elites had died at Elder Tai Feng's hands. This was enough to prove how terrifying this trump card assassin was. But now, he was lying on the ground like a dead dog. He wasn't pretending to be dead, but he really couldn't hold on any longer. He shivered. Just who was it that was chasing after Elder Tai Feng? This was simply too heaven-defying. When a terrifying aura swept out, and Empress Luan Xing appeared. She was dressed in a bright yellow imperial robe, and a vermilion cloak was tied behind her. The cloak was about 3 meters long, and even though she was at the bottom of the sea, it still fluttered slightly, appearing extremely domineering. Of course, her beautiful figure was also irresistible. Her figure was so perfect that one couldn't find a single flaw. It was enough to make one fall head over heels for her. Empress Luan Xing. The middle-aged man said in a trembling voice. As a qualified assassin, he naturally recognized the most powerful elites in the world. He swallowed with difficulty. Everyone said that Empress Luan Xing was powerful, and she was one of the 3 rulers of the Joint Peace Planet. He hadn't believed it before, and he thought that this empress had relied on her beauty to climb to the throne. Now, however, he finally realized how wrong he had been. Your Majesty, spare my life. Elder Tai Feng wailed. I'm willing to submit to your Majesty, and I'll do anything for you. He was an assassin, not a martyr. So what if he wanted to save his life? Empress Luan Xing ignored him completely, and she delivered another palm strike. It was as if she could split open heaven and earth, and destroy the world. Boom! This palm strike directly crushed Elder Tai Feng into pieces, and his body and soul were both destroyed. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man was only slightly dragged along, and he was torn to pieces by the terrifying power. Even his bones were destroyed. So powerful! Ling Han exclaimed in his mind. This was the first time he had seen Empress Luan Xing's true might. Her battle prowess could even make heaven and earth pale in comparison. Empress Luan Xing landed, and her eyes swept over Ling Han and Xue Yanyu. Suddenly, she walked toward them. Ling Han's heart jolted. Although they were all members of the same empire, one couldn't let their guard down. After all, heaven's might was even more unpredictable. Who knew what this empress was planning? Empress Luan Xing suddenly staggered as she walked. The aura of primal chaos around her body became chaotic. She was so powerful that she couldn't even walk steadily. Ling Han immediately understood. Although Empress Luan Xing had killed a supreme elite of the Dark Night Hall, she hadn't come without paying a price. True, she must have been ambushed. With the style of the Dark Night Hall, they would definitely have a 70% to 80% chance of success. Your Majesty, are you alright? Ling Han hurriedly asked. This question was only an excuse. Empress Luan Xing was obviously targeting Xue Yanyu. Get out of the way, Empress Luan Xing rebuked lightly. She stretched out a hand and pulled Ling Han to the side. Then, she grabbed Shui Yenyu's hand, opened her mouth, and bit down on her wrist. Ling Han was shocked. At this moment, he couldn't care less. He hurriedly rushed forward, using his body to protect her. At this moment, he had completely no other thoughts. He only knew one thing: as a man, if he couldn't protect his own woman, then what was the point of living? Hiss. He felt a sharp pain on his neck. His skin that was as strong as level 4 godly metal was immediately torn open. Empress Luan Xing had actually bitten him, and was sucking his blood. Are you a fuck you blood-sucking vampire? Ling Han wanted to resist, and he stretched out a hand to push the heavenly body tier. However, how could his power rival that of a heavenly body tier elite? This push was completely useless. His blood was endlessly sucked away, and his consciousness instantly blurred. Shui Yenyu, however, was dumbfounded. This was because the current posture of these two people was really too ambiguous. One was biting the other's neck as if they were kissing, while the other's hands were pressed on the other's voluptuous breasts, and they were even grabbing. It's over, Shui Yenyu felt as if the world had darkened. Who didn't know that the Empress was pure and unblemished? Although she was loved by countless men, including supreme overlords like the Eternity Sky Emperor and Jade Drop Emperor, she didn't care about them at all. Now, she was being molested by Ling Han. Whether he did it intentionally or not, it was the truth. When Empress Luan Xing came back to her senses, would Ling Han still be alive? At this moment, she really hated Ling Han to death. Why did he make a move? He should have just let the Empress suck his blood dry. In any case, the vitality of immortals was strong, and if their blood was sucked dry, it would only be a great blow to their vitality. They wouldn't die. But now, Ling Han was definitely going to die. In her eyes, a firm decision suddenly appeared in her heart. She suddenly drew her sword, and stabbed it at Empress Luan Xing's back. Chapter 11-13. If only one person could survive, Shui Yenyu naturally hoped that it would be Ling Han. She didn't care how the world would change after Empress Luan Xing died, and she didn't care how many people would hunt her and Ling Han down. At this moment, she only wanted Ling Han to be alive. Pa! However, when she thrust her sword forward, it was tightly grasped by a hand, unable to advance any further. Empress Luan Xingxi had already raised her head, and turned around. Although her expression couldn't be seen, it was definitely furious to the point of madness. Her own subordinate actually dared to assassinate her. A heinous crime of treason. Boundless killing intent surged, bringing with it a terrifying imperial might and domineering aura, causing Shui Yenyu's face to turn pale, completely devoid of blood. However, she was unafraid, and only looked deeply at Ling Han. They couldn't live together, but they could die together. However, the fatal blow that she had imagined didn't come even after a long time. She couldn't help but feel strange, and walked towards Empress Luan Xing. However, this empress was completely enveloped in an aura of primal chaos, and her expression was impossible to see. Ling Han's body moved, and he woke up. A large amount of blood loss caused him to instantly faint, but his spirit was very strong and resilient, so he naturally woke up very quickly. He reached out and grabbed Empress Luan Xing's wrist, his expression determined. If there's anything, come at me. He was very weak, but his tone was resolute. Empress Luan Xing was furious. How pure was she, yet she actually sucked the blood of a stinky man. This made her feel as if she had been sullied. She decisively raised her hand, and 4 stars appeared behind her. Each star exuded a terrifying aura, instantly causing Ling Han's skin to burst open. However, all his blood had been sucked away, and not a single drop of blood flowed out at this moment, appearing very strange. Biting the hand that feeds you. Ling Han wouldn't wait for death in vain, and immediately said, "Don't think I don't know that you were injured before, and suck my blood to control your injuries, or use a secret technique. So what? Empress Wan Xing asked coldly. Her target had been Shui Yanyu in the first place. It wasn't like she would kill her, so why did she have to get close to her? Tui, she had sucked this man's dirty blood, and had even become intimate with him. Just thinking about it gave her goosebumps. It was disgusting to the extreme. As an emperor, you have to be able to distinguish between kindness and grudges. If you kill us, you would be considered to be muddle-headed and tyrannical. Ling Han said whatever came to his mind. Now that he had fallen into the hands of an elite of the heavenly body tier, and could not possibly escape into the Black Tower, he naturally had to think of a way. So what if I betray the entire world? Empress Wan Xing wasn't fooled. Do you have any last words? Fuck, you don't play by the rules. Ling Han racked his brains, but the disparity in strength was too great, and no idea seemed to be of any use. Humph. Empress Wan Xing moved, a palm strike aimed at Ling Han's head. Ling Han couldn't care less. Even if he had to expose the secret of the Black Tower, he had to let Small Tower make a move. At worst, he would just flee to the ends of the world. Now that he had entered the immortal realm, the world was vast, unlike the small world where elites could easily find him in such a small place. However, Empress Wan Xing's palm strike came to a halt midway. Damn it! The Empress cursed in her mind. At this moment, the 9th King's will actually appeared, stopping her from slamming down this palm strike. She wanted to sever this thought, but if she did so, the implications would be too great. It meant that her million years of effort would go up in smoke. As expected, she had stopped it too late. This detestable man had already formed a favorable impression of the 9th King, and was affecting her at this moment. She hardened her heart, and was about to slap down again, but a wave of grief circulated in her heart, causing her to stop again. Detestable, detestable. Empress Wan Xing humphed, and tossed Ling Han out, saying coldly, today's matter has never happened. After saying this, her figure leaped, and instantly disappeared without a trace. How unreasonable. Ling Han gritted his teeth. He had already channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid, but this was used to heal his wounds. In fact, he wasn't actually injured, but he had suffered a great loss of origin power. Even the indestructible true fluid couldn't completely recover, and his face was still pale. Meanwhile, Shui Yanyu felt as if she were dreaming. They had actually escaped a calamity. Master, I've missed you so much. The Azura Demon Emperor appeared, looking terrified. Fuck off. Ling Han sent him flying with a kick. This guy was indeed unreliable. Previously, when Empress Wan Xing was present, he didn't even dare to fart, but now he ran out. However, it was no wonder. Even if the Azura Demon Emperor ran out, he would only be courting death. Thus, Ling Han only sent him flying to vent his anger, and didn't kill him. Phew, I didn't die. How fortunate. Ling Han breathed out. He'd just take it as being bitten by a dog. There were plenty of tonics in the Black Tower, and it wouldn't take long for his origin power to recover. Meanwhile, Shui Yanyu rolled her eyes at him, and said, do you know that you molested Her Majesty just now? Ha! Ling Han wore a strange expression. Are you joking? Just now, I was almost sucked dry, and I can still molest that woman. Humph, I clearly saw that both your hands were on Her Majesty's breasts. Shui Yanyu was full of jealousy. Previously, she was only concerned about Ling Han, and now that he was safe, she naturally began to feel jealous. What? Ling Han was stunned, and raised his hands in disbelief. These two people actually grabbed Empress Wan Xing's breasts. Fuck, why didn't he have any impression at all? He didn't feel anything at all. Are you still thinking about it? Shui Yanyu humphed. Men were indeed unreliable. What are you being jealous about? Ling Han pulled her closer. I almost died just now, so how could I think so much? Shui Yanyu also showed an expression of lingering fear. One of them had grabbed the Empress's breasts, and the other had attempted to commit regicide, but neither of them had died. This was practically an inconceivable miracle. My wife's hands are still the best. Ling Han snickered, and clasped the tea-bowl-sized breasts on Shui Yenyu's breasts. The feeling was really wonderful. Pervert, pervert. Shui Yenyu reprimanded. She was just about to pinch Ling Han, yet discovered that Ling Han had fallen into her arms, unconscious. Instantly, tenderness filled her heart, and she wrapped her arms around Ling Han. This man had stepped forward to protect her. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been such trouble later. She couldn't help but reveal a sweet smile. If a woman could encounter a man who was willing to risk his life for her, what else could she ask for? She hugged Ling Han, letting him rest comfortably in her soft bosom. She tried her best to rest. However, she still didn't understand. The Empress had clearly developed a frightening killing intent towards them, so why had she stopped? Was there anything in this world that could make the Empress feel apprehensive? Definitely not. But she soon threw this thought to the back of her mind, and only stared at Ling Han in a daze, a sweet feeling in her heart. Chapter 11-14. After an unknown amount of time, Shui Yenyu discovered that Ling Han had opened his eyes and was staring at her. She was embarrassed, and was about to release Ling Han when she felt her waist tighten. She had already been hugged by Ling Han. "Wife, let me lie for a while," Ling Han said in her arms. Shui Yenyu was both embarrassed and happy, but she was thin-skinned, so she scolded, "How old are you? Why are you still acting like a spoiled child?" Ling Han laughed loudly, and nibbled twice on her breast. Only then did he stand up, and said, "After a nap, I feel much more energetic." Although his origin chi had not completely recovered, it had indeed recovered quite a bit. Shui Yenyu rolled her eyes. This guy was really addicted to taking advantage of her, and had to make a move no matter what. The Azura Demon Emperor had already returned, and was obediently waiting in the distance, not daring to make a sound. Ling Han randomly ate some ginseng, Ganoderma, and other tonics, and then said, "Let's continue. Don't you want to rest a bit more?" Shui Yenyu was still worried about Ling Han. After all of his blood had been sucked away, and even with Ling Han's recovery ability, it was still difficult. "I'm fine." Ling Han broke into a smile, and then scratched his head, "But if we encounter that Empress again, how should we face her?" He had been confident before, but that was because he didn't know that he had once grabbed Empress Luan Xing's big bun. However, if they met again in the future, he would definitely involuntarily glance at Empress Luan Xing's chest and recall how it felt. If she saw him, he would probably go crazy. "Sigh, what's going on?" He sighed. Shui Yenyu shook her head, and said, "I believe that if this matter is leaked, you will even be hunted down by the Eternity Sky Emperor and Jade Drop Emperor. 2 rulers chasing a mountain river tier cultivator." This sounded funny, but it wasn't impossible. Who didn't know that these 2 emperors were filled with admiration for Empress Luan Xing? They had repeatedly said that as long as the Empress agreed to marry them, they were willing to give their empire as her dowry. Now that the goddess in their hearts had been assaulted, would they be sentenced to death by them? Ling Han counted on his fingers with a smile, and said, "How many heavenly body tier elites have I offended?" Shui Yenyu could only roll her eyes. A mere mountain river tier cultivator could attract the attention of so many heavenly body tier elites. Ling Han was probably the only one in the whole world who could do this. This caused her to be both speechless and impressed. Try another mountain river tier cultivator. To say nothing of mountain river tier cultivators, even sun moon tier elites didn't have such qualifications. The 2 of them continued forward. After going through life and death together, their feelings for each other had naturally deepened. Occasionally, they would exchange a glance, and their hearts would be filled with sweetness. Naturally, they did not feel bored along the way. Just a glance from the other party would fill their hearts. Just like before, they would let the Azura Demon Emperor fight those they could defeat, and hide from those they couldn't. Though the giant fish here were powerful, they didn't cultivate, nor did they develop intelligence. Thus, they didn't have to worry about them discovering the secret of the Black Tower. 10 days later, a pagoda appeared in front of them. This was a golden pagoda with 9 floors, but its height pierced through the surface of the sea. It was incomparably majestic. There were people currently entering the bottom floor, but there were also people who wanted to enter from the 2nd and 3rd floors. However, they were sent flying by a bolt of lightning the moment they approached. Some were killed, while others were severely wounded. Obviously, without sufficient strength, it was impossible to enter from the top floor. They could only enter from the bottom floor. "Let's go," Ling Han said. The two of them and the puppet walked over. The entrance to the bottom floor of the pagoda was ridiculously large. It was 300 meters tall, and about 150 meters wide. This was enough to accommodate a few hundred people entering at the same time. Ling Han entered, and the Azura Demon Emperor transformed into a small ball. Ling Han put it away so that he wouldn't give himself away. He didn't seem like a puppet. "Brother Ling," someone called out. Ling Han turned around, and saw that Xiao Sisi, Duan, and the others had already arrived. Naturally, the annoying Xia Wuk was also here. Aside from these 4 young king tiers, there were 3 other people standing beside them. Their auras were not the slightest bit weaker. Come. Let me introduce everyone," Duan said with a smile. Duan smiled. He pointed at Ling Han, and said, "This is Ling Han, brother Ling. He's the only person who has ever passed the stone statue formation." Hearing this, the 3 young men all looked astonished. They couldn't help but stare at Ling Han. They hadn't passed the stone statue formation because they had done so with the elders of their clans. Indeed, they had encountered the stone statue formation, but it was either at the sun-moon tier or at the heavenly body tier. They hadn't even had the chance to try. However, this didn't stop them from knowing how terrifying the stone statue formation was. As far as they knew, no one had ever passed it. Even those veteran heavenly body tier elites had failed at the 6th or 7th stage. According to the speculations of those elites, if one wanted to pass the stone statue formation, not only would one have to reach the peak stage of a major tier, but they would also have to possess battle prowess of at least 9 stars. Was this possible? Now, however, an example of success had appeared in front of them. How could they not be astonished? If it weren't for the fact that these words had come from Du An's mouth, they would definitely have treated them as nonsense. "Ling Han, these 3 are Quan Lishuan, Luo Jingren, and Guan Rong. It won't be long before we meet again in the Majestic Heaven sect. We'll become fellow disciples," Duan said with a smile. Ling Han nodded. He clasped his hands in greeting, and said, "Greetings to the 3 of you." The 3 young men didn't dare to be disrespectful. Thinking about how freakish Ling Han was, his background wouldn't be any weaker than theirs. Thus, they were all extremely polite. Meanwhile, Xia Wuk sneered. He felt that Ling Han's appearance was becoming more and more repulsive. Quan Lishuan and the others were all intelligent, and they immediately understood that Ling Han and Xia Wuk weren't on good terms. However, their backgrounds weren't any weaker than Xia Wuk's. Thus, they naturally didn't need to be wary of him and distance themselves from Ling Han. Who arrived first? What's the situation with this tower? Ling Han asked. "Ha, brother Ling, you came at the right time. We just happened to form a team," Su Jing said with a smile. Meanwhile, Xiao Sisi started to explain, and said, "This tower requires 10 people of the same cultivation level to pass through it together. As long as one person fails, the entire team will be eliminated. Moreover, there's only one chance." Ling Han gave an "oh." No wonder prodigies like them were all waiting here. They all wanted to ensure that nothing went wrong. One person might not be able to hold out against 9 people. Moreover, it wouldn't matter if they could try again if they failed. They could just treat it as learning experience the first time. However, if they failed once, they wouldn't be able to enter again. Thus, everyone naturally had to be careful. Are there any benefits to passing through this tower? He asked. Xia Wuk sneered again. What an unscrupulous person. He only thought about benefits and whatnot. Didn't they feel that being able to do what others couldn't was what supreme prodigies should do? I don't know. Xiao Sisi shook her head, and said, those who failed have already come out. They can stay here, but they can't form teams to try again. Meanwhile, the others didn't appear again. Perhaps they've entered the 2nd, 3rd, or even 9th level. Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, then what are we waiting for? Let's go. Chapter 11:16. Even though the people here were all supreme prodigies, they still felt their scalps go numb, and a strong sense of fear welled up in their hearts. Right before their eyes, a shadow had disappeared without a trace. They had all kept a close eye on it, but because the attack had created a huge shockwave that affected their divine sense slightly, a slight gap appeared, and they lost track of the shadow's whereabouts. It's all your fault. Xia Wuk pointed at Ling Han, a look of blame on his face. If you hadn't forced yourself to attack, that mysterious thing would have escaped. He was using this as an excuse to make a fuss. He was already displeased with Ling Han in the first place. Shui Yanyu was furious, and said, if it wasn't for Ling Han's reminder, you wouldn't have known that there was a shadow following us. Xia Wuk was a prodigy, after all, and had already given up on her after a few encounters. Naturally, he had also severed the admiration in his heart. Hearing this, he humphed coldly, and said, as a team, we naturally have to prioritize the team. This person thinks that everyone here is more powerful than him, and that there's no need for him to attack. Now, that mysterious shadow has escaped in vain. Ling Han was also angry, and said, after we get out, I'll beat you to death. Xia Wuk smirked coldly. After they got out, the one to be beaten up would only be Ling Han. His opponent was only powerful in terms of physique and recovery ability. Wasn't that just a punching bag? He said, I'll keep you company. Everyone, let's focus on how to find that shadow first. Luo Jingren stepped out to mediate. This was originally none of his business, but now that they were all in the same team, anyone who made a mistake would implicate the entire team. Meanwhile, Su Jing pondered for a moment, and said, have you guys ever heard of an existence that has no physical body, only a shadow? Everyone shook their heads. This was too uncanny. No matter what, our goal is to get out of here. Once we're about to succeed, that mysterious shadow will definitely attack, Duan said. This received everyone's approval. If this mysterious shadow wanted to stop them from passing this trial, then it would definitely attack. Otherwise, they didn't need to pay any attention to it. In any case, their first goal was to get out of here. They moved forward again, but this time, everyone's eyes were fixed on the swaying shadows on the ground. The light here came from the glowing pillars. Because of this, every time they passed by a pillar, the shape of their shadows would change. After walking for an unknown amount of time, the number of shadows changed. The 10 of them stopped in their tracks at the same time, their expressions showing that they had expected this. There were more shadows on the ground, and not 11, but 12. Fuck, Phantom Shadow still has companions? Shui Yanyu couldn't help but lean closer to Ling Han. She was a woman, and was naturally fearful of this kind of unknown things. Moreover, her lover was right beside her, so she had unknowingly developed a sense of dependence on him. The crowd did not attack blindly, because they did not know which two figures belonged to Ghastly Shadow. Separate a bit. Everyone maintained a certain distance from the people on both sides. This way, the two silhouettes wouldn't be able to blend in with the group of shadows and appear out of place. Kill. The 10 of them attacked at the same time, each displaying their strongest power. Bam, over there. Ling Han opened the Eye of Truth, locked onto a ghostly shadow, and chased after it. This ghostly shadow had the ability to change nimbly. Just then, it had been the same size as their figures, but now it had soared into the air, transforming into a small black dot. It was so small that it was almost indiscernible. No wonder it had escaped previously. Ling Han stabbed out with his sword, and the divine demon's sword transformed into a streak of light. He had already activated the fast technique, and it was indescribably fast. Pooh! The tip of the sword stabbed into the small black dot, and there was actually a feeling as if it had stabbed into something solid. Ling Han shook the blade of his sword, and a huge shock wave spread out, shattering the small black dot. Instantly, countless wisps of black smoke rose, and there was even an ear-piercing screech. No, this wasn't a sound, but a divine sense, which transmitted into Ling Han's mind and caused an impact. Humph, trying to shake his divine sense. What a joke. If one wanted to injure his soul, they would at least have to be at a much higher cultivation level than him. Even those at the consummate level of the mountain river tier couldn't possibly injure Ling Han's soul. Under the tempering of the indestructible heaven's scroll, his divine sense was far too tough. The screech was like a flood that had hit a dam, and it instantly bounced back. A hint of surprise appeared on Ling Han's face. This kind of attack, or rather, this kind of form was slightly familiar to him. Shwa, the wisps of black smoke condensed again, transforming into a shadow. Then, it suddenly waved its arm. Chung, chung, chung. 5 sharp claws actually shot out from its hand, and they were like 5 sharp blades. Humph, insignificant tricks. Guan Rong was beside Ling Han, and he naturally wasn't willing to let Ling Han steal all the limelight. He immediately formed a fist and punched out. There were as many as 60 divine patterns on his fist, making it seem as if his arm had become a supreme god weapon. Peng, the fist landed on the ghostly shadow's sharp claws, and the divine patterns lit up. It was instantly blocked by the ghostly shadow's attack, and even sent the ghostly shadow flying. Obviously, whether it was power or battle prowess, the ghostly shadow was far from being a match for those at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Guan Rong's confidence instantly soared after his strike succeeded. The unknown was the most terrifying thing. Now, the strength that this ghostly shadow displayed was at most in the high extreme of the mountain river tier. It was just that it was extremely strange, so Guan Rong naturally wasn't as cautious as before. However, this ghostly shadow seemed to be similar to Ling Han, possessing an astonishing recovery ability. As the black smoke swirled, it immediately returned to its original appearance, and once again waved its claws. As a cold glint flashed, its figure swayed like a god of death. At this moment, everyone naturally understood that the corpses that had been split up previously hadn't been done by demonic beasts, but rather by this ghostly shadow. It could slice a person into 6 pieces with a single strike, and added with its seemingly indestructible body, it couldn't be underestimated. Ling Han followed up, and used the 7-kill subduing soul technique. Ah! A mournful scream rang out in everyone's mind. This was the wailing of the ghostly figure. The ghostly shadow could no longer maintain its original appearance. Instead, it was constantly changing. One moment, it was a human, the next moment, it was a beast, and the next moment, it was a fish, and then it turned into a bird. In the end, it was a mess, as if it was about to fall apart. As expected, Ling Han nodded in his heart. This kind of thing was almost unafraid of physical attacks. It could recover immediately after being shattered, but it would be destroyed if it encountered a spiritual attack. Guan Rong immediately laughed and said, "So these things are afraid of soul attacks." Humph! My soul-refining swords. Xia Wuk waved his hands, and countless golden swords flew out from his eyes. These weren't physical swords, rather, they were formed from his divine sense. Xiao, xiao, xiao. The 10,000 swords shot forth in unison, and the other ghostly figure was naturally unable to escape. It was nailed to the pillar by the golden swords. It also let out a blood-curdling screech as its body greatly changed. Very quickly, it twisted a few times before completely disappearing. Chapter 11:17. A smug smile appeared on Xia Wux's face. It was the same spiritual shock, but Ling Han could only seriously injure Guiying, while he was able to instantly kill him, showing the gap in the cultivation of the two's spiritual consciousness. Ling Han glanced at him and couldn't help but feel disdain in his heart. The 7-kill subduing soul art just now wasn't his full strength. He wanted to know just how strong this ghostly shadow was. Naturally, he wanted to increase the power of the 7-kill subduing soul art step by step. However, in Xia Wux's eyes, this was a sign that Ling Han was weak. Ling Han had no intention of arguing with him. Once they were out of here and the team was disbanded, he would definitely beat this guy up. He would let him know that being cocky was just asking to be humiliated. "What is this?" Xiao Sisi asked. She was a woman and a great beauty, so she didn't mind showing some ignorance. This wouldn't make others look down on her. On the contrary, even if they didn't understand men's words, they wouldn't easily open their mouths, especially among a group of geniuses. Who didn't want face? Everyone was silent, because no one could recognize what this thing was. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, "This might not be a being from the god realm." "What?" Everyone blurted out. If it wasn't a being from the god realm, then what was it? "Ling Han, don't be an alarmist," Xia Wux immediately reprimanded. Ling Han didn't even bother to look him in the eye as he said, "If my guess is correct, this should be something from the netherworld." This made him think of the Azura Demon Emperor, who also didn't have a physical body, and also possessed divine sense attacks. Moreover, they were both very weak. However, this ghostly shadow seemed to have lost its intelligence, and could only make some attacks mechanically. Otherwise, if it had been the Azura Demon Emperor, with such a strong opponent, how could he have possibly come forward to die? Netherworld. All the prodigies revealed solemn expressions. They were very lucky. The barrier between the two worlds in this galaxy was extremely sturdy, and no passageway had appeared. Thus, they did not need to fight against the netherworld realm. They had only heard of such a place. However, experts like Venerable Trinity, who had retired from the two-realm battlefield, were still unable to exterminate the netherworld invaders. This showed just how powerful the netherworld was. "Brother Ling, are you sure?" Su Jing's expression was very serious. If a netherworld realm being really appeared here, then that would really be incredible. Although this ghostly shadow was very weak, it was very likely that there were even stronger netherworld realm beings here. This means that there may be a passageway between the two worlds in their galaxy. War, super war. Ling Han shook his head and said, "I'm just guessing." Besides, even if they really are from the netherworld, that doesn't necessarily mean there's a passageway between the two worlds. Perhaps the owner of the great necropolis brought them here from somewhere else. This was indeed very possible. Ling Han had seen the narcissism of this tomb owner before. After passing through some puppet sect formation, he would only duplicate one, no, several of them. That was because the stone statue formation that Heavenly Body tier and Sun Moon tier cultivators had passed through was obviously not the same. Then, this tomb owner had killed many great elites of the netherworld in the two-realm battlefield, so it didn't seem impossible that he had captured some of them and thrown them here to sing his praises. However, this tomb owner should have died countless years ago. If he had really captured netherworld realm beings and brought them here, would he have been able to live for so long? Ling Han shook his head. At least for now, there was no solution, so there was no need to waste time. This ghostly shadow was muddle-headed, and it didn't have any intelligence to speak of. They had already followed Ling Han and the others. They were like children playing, so they naturally couldn't ask for any clues. Thus, everyone directly used their divine sense attacks to kill the remaining ghostly shadow. This kind of ghostly shadow was very strange. After being killed, it directly turned into mist and dissipated, leaving no corpse behind. Ling Han used his divine sense to ask the Azura Demon Emperor. This was an authentic native of the Netherworld. After hearing Ling Han's words, the Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly said, "According to Master's description, I am 90% sure that this is a creature of the Netherworld, and they are called the Shadow Devourer tribe." Shadow Devourer tribe? Ling Han was surprised. That's right. This kind of creature feeds on shadows, and by devouring shadows, they can absorb the life essence of the shadow owner, killing people invisibly, the Azura Demon Emperor said. However, the ghostly shadow that Master spoke of is clearly not right. It seems to have lost its consciousness, and only instinctively attached itself to Master's shadow, not causing any harm. Ling Han nodded. This should be the Shadow Devourer tribe, but their consciousness had already been destroyed by the tomb owner, and even their ability to devour shadows had disappeared. They only instinctively liked to follow shadows. Let's continue. Who cares if these ghostly shadows are from the Netherworld? They aren't powerful at all, and we can easily deal with them, Li Kuanxian said proudly. Indeed, divine sense attacks could pose a great threat to ordinary immortals, but Li Kuanxian and the others were all descendants of super forces, and had secret techniques to cultivate their divine sense. Not only were they powerful, but they also had divine sense attacks. Thus, they really didn't fear the ghostly shadows here. They started walking, and not long after, the number of shadows on the ground increased. This time, they were prepared, so they naturally didn't have the slightest fear. They attacked one by one, and killed these ghostly shadows. In fact, it wasn't just divine sense attacks that could threaten these ghostly shadows. Fierce flames, lightning, and other techniques could also cause damage, but the effects wouldn't be as obvious as divine sense attacks. The ghostly shadows were least afraid of direct physical attacks. Thinking back to the time when the Azura Demon Emperor was cut into 9 pieces, he still didn't die for 100,000 years, which showed this. So it's so simple. After walking for a while, they saw a massive metal door appear in front of them. It was very likely to be the end of the first stage. Everyone smiled. For ordinary mountain river tier cultivators, this path was actually not easy to pass, because the ghostly shadows came and went without a trace. And aside from the descendants of super forces, how many people cultivated divine sense attacks? Thus, if it were someone else, it would definitely be very difficult for them to pass. Wait. When they neared, they discovered that there was a massive demonic beast lying in front of that door, but because its color was too similar to the tiles on the ground, it was very difficult to distinguish it from a distance. It was difficult to describe what this demonic beast looked like, because it was lying on the ground, like an extremely flat carpet. The demonic beast guarding the stage. It's here. We have to defeat it. Let's test the waters first. Xiao Sisi smiled faintly, and said, "Then let me show off." She drew out a bow. There were divine patterns on the bow, and the arrow was the same. This was a god tool. So Fairy Xiao is also skilled in archery. Everyone praised. At the same time, they were slightly wary. Elites that were skilled in archery could attack from an extremely long distance, and it was impossible to guard against them. I've only made a small accomplishment. Xiao Sisi said modestly as she drew the bow. Wang, the divine patterns on the bow and arrow all lit up, exuding a domineering aura. Everyone's hearts trembled. The might of this arrow could not be underestimated. Even they had to be careful when facing it head-on, and if they were ambushed, there was a very high possibility that they would be hit. Chapter 11:18. Swish, the sharp arrow was released. This arrow was extremely fast and turned into a stream of light, shooting towards that strange demonic beast. Ling Han nodded to himself. The power of this arrow might not be comparable to the annihilating dragon star arrow, but the difference was not that big. However, if he used this bow and arrow to execute the annihilating dragon star arrow, the power would definitely be stronger. If he used the ultimate arrow, then it would be even more powerful. Ding! The sharp arrow hit the target, emitted a series of sparks, and then bounced back. That demonic beast seemed to have been startled awake and suddenly stood up. This was like a carpet being picked up from the middle and then lifted up. It was extremely strange. But in the process of being lifted up, this demonic beast's form was also changing, from a thin carpet to a ferocious tiger. It was 30 meters long, 15 meters tall, and its entire body was scarlet red. Its neck hair seemed to be burning, and it was awe-inspiring. Everyone was shocked, not because of the demonic beast's appearance, but because Xiao Cici's arrow did not have any effect at all. This was very shocking. The strength of this demonic beast is beyond our expectations. What do we do? Force our way in? Why don't we use a few people to lure this demonic beast away first, then open the door and leave together? This is a good idea. There is no point in wasting time here. Everyone nodded. After a discussion, they decided that Duan, Xi Xian, and Su Jing would lure the demonic beast away, while the remaining people would be responsible for opening the door. They were all prodigies of the current generation. Since the plan was made, they would naturally carry it out without any hesitation. Ugly monster, come and chase us. The three of them started to provoke the demonic beast, but that demonic beast was lazy and couldn't be bothered with them. It was as if it had been shot by an arrow earlier but didn't chase after them. Duan and the other two hurriedly attacked, shooting out waves of essence force at that demonic beast. This demonic beast was too lazy to bother with them at first, but after being hit so many times, it finally couldn't take it anymore. With a roar, it charged at the three of them. This pounce was extremely fast. Duan and the other two scattered and escaped, using the terrain here to play hide-and-seek with this demonic beast. Ling Han and the others also rushed out and started to attack that door. Bang bang bang, the loud noises continued, but what surprised them was that the door was unbreakable. Everyone unleashed their ultimate techniques, but no matter how powerful their attacks were, which could insta-kill even ordinary elites at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, they were completely useless against this massive door. I can't open it at all. They had to admit that their strength was like a mayfly encountering a tree in front of this door. They were completely unshakable. It's on the tiger's neck. Xiao Cici was meticulous and pointed at the demonic beast. Everyone looked over and saw that there was actually a key tied around the neck of the demonic beast. Come, we must defeat this ferocious tiger and obtain the key to open the door. No tricks. Then let's call Brother Du and the others back and fight with all our strength. Everyone was filled with heroic spirit. Previously, they had only decided to lure the tiger away from the mountain because they didn't want to waste time. But now that they could only fight, they had nothing to fear. Shui Yanyu and the spear-wielding man retreated to one side. They could not possibly interfere in this kind of battle. Otherwise, they would be courting death. This demonic tiger was very powerful. Otherwise, Duan and the others would not have needed to lure it away. They could have just trapped it at one side. Everyone sent out a signal for Duan and the others to return. Huh? Duan and the others circled back, and couldn't help but feel strange when they found that the door was still locked. There's no need to ask. This door can't be opened at all. We need to use the key hanging around that demonic beast's neck, Guan Rong explained. Ha, then let's fight. Duan and the others were not the slightest bit afraid. The 8 great prodigies stood side by side, welcoming the demonic tiger that had run back. This demonic tiger was somewhat unbelievably powerful. There were as many as 80 divine patterns on its body. What kind of concept was this? It was equivalent to an 8-star genius. Moreover, it was at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier in the first place, and added with the power of 8 stars, it was so powerful that it had no friends. No wonder it was a team of 10 people. Although Ling Han and the others were all prodigies among prodigies, they would still be defeated if they encountered this demonic beast. Theoretically, the the number of 10 people could make up for the gap of 1 star of battle prowess. After all, these prodigies had not formed the 5th mountain river yet, and were practically helpless against this demonic beast. Come! The 8 of them were all brimming with confidence. Aside from Ling Han, the other 6 had all reached the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and their power was as high as 6 stars. Added with the secret techniques that they had grasped, their battle prowess was at least 7 stars, and when they used their ultimate moves, their battle prowess would definitely reach 8 stars. Thus, the possibility that they would win was still relatively high. I'll focus on attacking from the front, Ling Han said. This received the complete approval of Xiao Sisi, Su Jing, and Duan. Though Xia Wuk was very displeased, he did not object. They knew that the toughness of Ling Han's physique was far superior to theirs, and he was the best choice to fight from the front. Meanwhile, Li Xian and the others had never seen Ling Han's defenses, and were slightly surprised. A cultivator in the high extreme of the mountain river tier would fight from the front. But even Xia Wuk did not object, so they naturally could only believe him. Ling Han drew out the divine demon sword. After it had awakened, it immediately charged towards the demonic tiger. Peng, the demonic tiger, waved its paw, and instantly sent Ling Han flying. Its power was too strong, and had almost reached the true pinnacle of the mountain river tier. Ling Han was completely not qualified to stand against it. Wah! He spat out a mouthful of blood, and couldn't help but feel gloomy. Previously, he had just been sucked clean by Empress Yuan Xing, and had only recovered a little with great difficulty. Now, he was beaten to the point of spitting blood again. Was there a grudge between them? This strike dislocated a few of his bones, but Ling Han only shook his origin power, and his bones naturally returned to their original positions. With a spring of his feet, he charged back again. He used the fast technique, and his attacks were like a tidal wave. However, though Ling Han's physique was freakish, that demonic beast was not simple either. Under Ling Han's strikes, it was similarly unaffected, as if it were indestructible. This was really inconceivable. Previously, it had turned into a carpet that was soft to the extreme, but now, it was as if it had been forged from high-grade godly metal, and was incredibly hard. How could these two completely different qualities possibly appear on the same body? The demonic beast pounced, its battle prowess powerful, and it had an aura of supremacy. Ling Han held it back from the front, and the 7 of them attacked with all their might, but every attack was a waste of effort. This demonic tiger's freakish defense even surpassed that of Ling Han's. This is definitely not a demonic beast, but a puppet, Ling Han concluded. He only possessed such a physique because he had cultivated the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, so how could any random cat or dog compare to him? However, if this demonic tiger was a puppet forged from godly metal, then it was easy to understand. As long as level 5 godly metal was used to forge it, its defense would naturally be unsolvable by mountain river tier elites. This could also explain why its power was so strong. Chapter 11:20. Here, take it, kids, the stone tablet said. 10 jade bottles appeared out of thin air and were placed on the ground. Evidently, 1 bottle for each person. This was a team's victory, so everyone received the same reward. It didn't matter who contributed the most to get more benefits. Everyone picked up a pill bottle. From this, it could be seen that Xia Wuk had the upper hand. Evidently, the spear-wielding man was only his subordinate, so he naturally had to hand over the good stuff. Ling Han picked up the pill bottle, but there was no label on it. He asked, "Excuse me, what pill is this?" "Purple Pattern Mountain River Pill," the stone tablet said. "What is this?" No one had heard of this pill before. "After consuming it, your strength will increase by 1 star for the next 2 hours, the stone tablet explained. That's lousy. Ling Han couldn't help but be disappointed. Hey. You should learn to say thank you after taking something from someone else, the stone tablet said with dissatisfaction. Moreover, you've only passed the first stage. How can you expect to receive such a precious reward? So you're saying that we can still receive rewards after passing the second and third stages? Ling Han asked. That's right. As long as you're strong enough, the stone tablet said. Instantly, everyone was filled with fighting spirit. They weren't moved by the rewards, but they were all the most powerful prodigies of their generation. They had great ambitions and were confident that they could become the first. What's the next stage? Ling Han asked. Why should I tell you? The stone tablet said. If you want to know, experience it for yourself. However, I can tell you that the second stage is a maze. You'll only receive rewards if you can pass it within 2 hours. There's no need to form teams for this stage, nor are you allowed to form teams. You may go. The stone tablet didn't say anything else. A staircase appeared in front of them, leading to the second level. Hee, everyone, let's go. Duan smiled and took the lead. However, Ling Han didn't move. He was curious. Since this was a tomb, why was there a test and challenge? Even if this old senior had left behind a wisp of his will, wouldn't it be better for him to guard his tomb? Why did he have to make it seem like a disciple of a large sect? However, since there was a reward, he still wanted to have some fun. He wouldn't lose anything anyway. Ling Han, didn't you want to fight? Xia Wuk pointed at Ling Han. Bring it on. Ling Han naturally wasn't afraid. On account of the fact that we fought together just now, I won't kill you. I'm just letting you know that there's always someone stronger than you out there, so don't be too arrogant. Who would have thought that Xia Wuk would actually say something like this? Ling Han was slightly astonished. He had initially thought that Xia Wuk was a petty and narrow-minded person. He hadn't thought that he would be so broad-minded. He pondered for a moment, then said, since you've said that, I'll spare your life as well. I just want you to understand. Ha, you really are arrogant, Xia Wuk said coldly. Come and fight. He shouted softly, and more than 60 divine runes appeared on his hands. Behind him, 4 mountains and rivers appeared, exuding a terrifying aura. More than 60 divine inscriptions meant that he had the strength of 6 stars. You want to threaten me with just this? Ling Han smiled faintly. It wasn't as if his opponent hadn't seen his defenses before. Although the power of 6 stars above the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier was very powerful, it was still not enough to defeat him. Of course, that's not all. Xia Wuk retrieved a black bracer and put it on his hand. With a wave of his hand, the bracer was activated, and the patterns engraved on it all lit up. Instantly, the number of divine patterns on his hand increased drastically. 71. That means his strength has increased by 1 star. Ling Han was surprised. You didn't use this divine artifact when we were crossing the stone statue formation. It's not that I don't want to use it. It's just that this god tool is damaged, and it can only last for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. Xia Wuk didn't hide anything, and he revealed the truth. It would have taken more than half an incense stick of time to pass through the stone statue array. Thus, even if he had used this divine artifact, he would have only been able to advance a little further. It would have been impossible for him to pass through. Ling Han laughed and said, Are you confident that you can defeat me in half an incense stick's time? It's more than enough, Xia Wuk said proudly. Although Ling Han's defenses were astonishing, Xia Wuk's current power was close to the pseudo-sun moon tier. If he unleashed a secret technique, he might even be able to kill Ling Han. Hee, I hope that you can maintain your confidence. Ling Han smiled as he retrieved the lion seal. This seal could be used 10 times in total, and depending on how long it was used each time, the maximum number of times it could be used might decrease. His battle prowess was far inferior to Xia Wuk's. After all, there was a clear gap between their cultivation levels. If they fought under normal circumstances, he would definitely be tortured. How could a proud person like him be willing to be tortured? Thus, he didn't hesitate to use the lion seal again. He slapped the divine seal onto his body, and divine patterns instantly appeared on his body. A quick count revealed that there were as many as 800 divine patterns in total. Pooh! Xia Wuk spluttered, his face filled with astonishment. He only had 70 or so divine patterns, yet Ling Han had 800. How big was this gap? It wasn't just 10 times. Rather, it was one major tier plus a few dozen minor levels. No matter how prodigious he was, how could he defeat elites at the Sun-Moon tier? Moreover, Ling Han's current power wasn't just at the Sun-Moon tier. He was at the consummate level of the Sun-Moon tier. I admit defeat. Xia Wuk said with a bitter expression. Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, "Do you think I'll stop fighting just because you said that I admit defeat? I've already used the lion seal once, so how can I let this go?" He charged forward and spread open his hands. Divine patterns swirled around him, and boundless power surged into his body. His power had already completely dominated Xia Wuk, and Ling Han didn't even need to use any techniques. He easily grabbed Xia Wuk, and then gave him a good beating. Although his impression of Xia Wuk had improved slightly, it only erased his killing intent. He still had to beat Xia Wuk, and there was no need for him to hold back. "You've gone too far," Xia Wuk wailed. However, Ling Han completely ignored him, and continued to beat him up. The spear-wielding man was dumbstruck. In his mind, Xia Wuk was an invincible war god, and he should be invincible among those at the same cultivation level. Yet now, he was being beaten up by someone who was a minor level lower than him. Regardless of the reason, the truth was the truth. No matter what, a young king tier should be invincible. After giving Xia Wuk a good beating, Ling Han casually tossed him to the side. "Ling Han, when we meet again at the Majestic Heaven sect in the future, I'll definitely make you pay for this humiliation," Xia Wuk shouted. Ling Han laughed, and said, "You won't have that chance." He was advancing at a rapid pace, and the gap between him and Xia Wuk would become smaller and smaller. Moreover, the Sun-Moon tier was an extremely difficult hurdle to overcome. It was definitely possible for him to catch up to Xia Wuk in a short period of time. "Wife, let's go." Ling Han held Shui Yenyu's hand as they walked toward the second floor. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.